IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Sorry we cannot be with you all yesterday, but been under the weather a little bit lately, just kind of off and on, have some good days and some bad days. Yesterday was not a good day, but my guy Sean Davis checked in on me, made me feel better, made me laugh, so got through it. That the healing power of laughter helped me feel better today. So now we are back and ready to rock and roll with another subject and another topic today, Sean. And look, Joe Rudolph is going to be Notre Dame's offensive line coach after the things that we discussed the other night, the hurdles with meeting with Jack Swarbrick and Father Jenkins, and most importantly, the Notre Dame players. That all went through. It went through from everything we've been told incredibly well. Rave reviews, so that's all good. Got the players' stamp of approval. Not that they would have been able to kind of like be this trump card. If they said no, Freeman's like, well, I was going to hire him, but the players didn't like him, so I guess I can't hire him now, right? But it is an important part of the process and something that Coach Freeman puts a lot of value on. So that went through, and so now you're going to see Joe Rudolph as the offensive line coach. And so we now have a pretty good idea of what the offensive staff is going to look like. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the Notre Dame offense from a combination of the staff and where the roster is, and discuss whether or not Notre Dame is better off now or if they were better off a year ago. So have they projected upwards or have they trended downwards with all the changes? Because, look, we've seen some major changes in the offensive staff, right? Obviously, Tom Maurice has gone to Alabama. He is no longer the offensive coordinator or the quarterback's coach. And Harry Hiestand retired. So now you're looking at it to where you've got a new offensive coordinator. That's going to could potentially impact the tight end room, because now – instead of just coaching the tight ends coach is now also the offensive coordinator. You've got a new quarterbacks coach who's going to have to learn these players. And you have a new offensive line coach who's going to have to do the same thing. Dylan McCullough is back, and Chancey Stuckey is back. And so you look at the room, it's a lot different. You're going to have different GA this year. I think you have different analysts this year. And, of course, the roster's different. So we just want to kind of get a view of, okay, is the Notre Dame offense trending in the right direction or the wrong direction? And that's what the point of today's show is. And so we'll talk a little bit big picture, Sean, and I'll let you kick off first. We'll talk a little big picture, and then we'll kind of dive into each specific thing, because the reality is, Sean, this is an important topic because Coach Freeman, I thought, did really well with his offensive hires last year. Really well. When you look at what Coach McCullough did as the running backs coach, what Coach Stuckey did as the receivers coach was outstanding. What Coach Parker did as the tight ends coach was outstanding. And what Coach Hiestand did as the offensive line coach was outstanding. Yeah. He needed to have a good offseason, right? And the perception is not good, if we're going to be honest, the way it all went down. But the staff is in place now, and it's good to focus on, okay, forget the way we got here. Forget that, and let's look at who's here. Because if this offense doesn't take a step forward, Sean, this team isn't going to get a lot better. And I think that's why this is an important topic. And now that we have the staff settled and we know what the roster is going to look like, and spring ball is less than about 20 days away, it's time to look and say, okay, are we in a better place now than we were at this time a year ago? Yes or no? Why or why not? And that's what we're going to have to find out. And that's what we're going to discuss today, Mr. Davis.
Well, I definitely think we're in a much better place. And I just want to use this because it was something that I had an opportunity to discuss with Malik a little bit earlier today, and that's how do you make an imprint on good teams? Like, how do you stun good teams? And when you face good teams, I believe that you stun good teams offensively. You don't really stun them defensively, right? Because good teams feel like they're going to score eventually. If you shut us down the first quarter, you shut us down the second quarter, eventually they feel like they're going to get going and put their 30 points up. In order to get the attention of good teams and get over the hump, you have to be able to do it offensively. You have to be able to grab their attention and make them say, oh, snap, we're in a ball game. Like, they came ready to play. And I think when you see teams ascend, like Clemson with Dabo, they did it with offense, even though they had a very good defense. I think when you thought LSU, they made their point with offense. They had a lot of great players that went to the NFL on defense. And what we've seen historically at Notre Dame is that the defense has been able to keep Notre Dame in games against good teams, but they haven't been able to make that mark offensively. And when you look at the offensive positions and the offensive hires, whether or not you love the hire, the one thing I do love, Brian, is the continuity. Because I think this staff is going to have more continuity and more of a family atmosphere than the staff last year.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, the outlook on it. And I think that's going to transfer over to the players, and we'll see it on the field in some way, form, or fashion. We already know with Sam Hartman, we saw Tyler Buckner's improvement in the Gator Bowl. We fully expect that the quarterback position will take a step forward as well. We see the numbers in the wide receiver room come forth. Caleb Smith coming in as a grad transfer. The great freshman class that they have. Tobias Merriweather taking a step forward, along with the cast of characters that have been here for more than 2 years. You fully expect Chancey Stuckey in his second year to make a further imprint on the offense with his wide receiving core. And I believe it was Dylan McCullough that said it on Twitter the other day. Name one Saturday in the fall where we're not going to have the best quarterback, the best running backs, and the best offensive line on the field. And you're hard pressed to find anything on the schedule to say, well, I mean, he's telling the truth. And so when you expect all of that, when you get to these big games, when you get to Ohio State coming in, when you get to USC coming in, you fully expect the offense to be the unit to take the field and make the other team say, like, oh, okay, this is not the same Notre Dame. This is a different Notre Dame that we have to battle and grab their attention. So when we look at the roster and we look at the coaching staff and the setup, regardless of how you feel about the hires, they are definitely set up in a much better position than they were in 2022.
Well, and I think that's why the hires had to be important, because of some of the other stuff is going to be better off. And, you talk about the coaching staff and being in a better place. And that's an interesting dynamic to discuss, Sean, because in some ways I could say, hey, look, this is a staff where once again, for the second year in a row, you have a bunch of guys that have never coached together. They're going to have to coach together before, right?
Mhm.
None of the guys on this staff have coached with Joe Rudolph. None of the guys on this staff have coached with Gino Guidugli, I don't believe, right? And it's because none of the offensive coaches are from Cincinnati. Now, Marcus Freeman has, and Brian Mason has, and Al Washington has, but none of the other offensive coaches have. And that's very true. So, but you still have 3 coaches from last year that are still back, whereas the last year you sort of had 1.5. Now, Coach Heastan had coached with Coach Reese before, but he never coached with any of the other coaches before. So it is interesting in the fact that you are able to kind of have more coaches that have worked well together, coaches that kind of came in together, because it's all the new guys that are still here, right? Because Coach Heastan retired and then Tommy left. So guys that had been at Notre Dame before are gone. And now it's the new guys that kind of had to come in as new guys, hadn't been at Notre Dame before, had to kind of connect and bond together. They were the skill position coaches last year, running back, receiver, tight ends. So clearly there was a partnership that developed with those guys. And so you do have, like you said, Sean, even though you have a new offensive coordinator, you didn't hire an outsider that's bringing in a completely different system and a completely different dynamic. Jared Parker is going to do things a lot differently than Tommy Reese, which is always the case when you hire a new coordinator. And you should always want a coordinator, whether you like him or as a hire or not. Or if you think Tommy Reese is the greatest thing since sliced bread, you still want Jared Parker to do it his way. If you think Tommy Reese wasn't good, then obviously you're going to want Jared Parker to do it his way. Coach always has to be himself. That's an important piece, but it's being himself within the same terminology, the same overall philosophy, the same overall structure. And there's just going to be some wrinkles and some adjustments and some tinkers here and there, but it's going to be a lot of, okay, they know this, the players know this. And I think that's an important part of it, Sean. And so I think that's kind of where this conversation begins, is there is going to be some continuity, where last year there really wasn't a lot of continuity. You had continuity from a scheme standpoint, but all the coaches needed to get to know the new players. And that's why I say 1.5, because Coach Heastan had worked with Coach Reese before. That's where the half comes from. But he'd never really worked with any of the players in the roster outside of Josh Lugg.
Yeah.
And he only worked with Josh for a year. So there wasn't continuity there. He didn't recruit most of those guys to the team. And so there was a period where Coach Heastan and Coach McCullough and Coach Stuckey and Coach Parker had to really get to know the roster. And until you get to know the roster, you don't know which buttons, to necessarily push with each kid. So, for example, look at Coach Heastan. He's going to coach his way. But part of the reason that he's a successful coach, on is he's going to coach his way, but he also understands that I got to push Robert Hainsey's buttons a little bit differently. And you guys had a great interview with Robert yesterday, so I'm using an example. But the buttons I got to push to get Robert going are going to be different than the buttons I got to push to get Liam Eichenberg going, or Aaron Banks going, or Zeke Correll going, or whoever else. And that's what good understand. Yes, I'm going to coach my way, but I also know that, hey, I gotta. This kid needs more of a kick in the pants than this kid. This kid needs sometimes more of a, let me put my arm around you and tell you you're going to be all right after I ripped you, where this other kid doesn't need that, right? And so that's where it takes time to learn that. Well, now at receiver, at tight end, and running back, there is going to be an element to that where they already have that relationship established. And I do think that's continuity. And the reality is, Sean, is you can look at things a certain way and say, hey, there's turnover and there's this and there's that. But sometimes, and this doesn't even mean a negative towards Tommy Rees. It's not even about Tommy Rees.
Yeah.
But you come down from the standpoint of saying, like, sometimes turnover can not be good or bad, but it's just how you handle it is can be good. So the thing I point to is, Dabo Sweeney brought in Chad Morris to run his offense when he became the head coach of Clemson, right? And the year before Chad Morris gets there, they're averaging like 20.5 points a game. Chad comes in there and they get better, right? Every year, 10, 11, they jump from 20, they're averaging 24 points a game.
Yeah.
Up to 33, 41, 42. They had 30.8 the year before, it was Deshaun Watson's freshman year. Had a couple games where he was out, so the offense took a little bit of a dip. But he had established the foundation. And then he leaves, and what did Dabo do? He promoted from within. Tony Elliott and Jeff become co-coordinators, right? And he surrounded himself with people that knew what he was trying to accomplish at Clemson. They weren't big names. They were not sexy hires. They were not, oh, you went out and got this guy. And probably more things to say about them that people are saying about Jared Parker, understandably, justifiably so. These aren't criticisms of people. Yeah. This is just when a guy does not have experience doing something. You can't sit there and I can't sit here in good faith and say Jared Parker's going to crush it next year. I just know it. How can I possibly know that? Just like I couldn't in good conscience if I wanted to be, Debbie Downer and say, this is a bad hire. He's going to do a terrible job. I have no idea. No idea. None of us do. And it would have been the same thing then. But he made that hire, and then the next 4 years, that Clemson offense carried that program to a championship. Now, the defense was obviously very good too, right? But it was the offense that truly separated Clemson and really took them to that next level. And that's what Notre Dame is going to have to do. But offensively, they've got to make that jump. And so it was important to Coach Freeman get the hires right. And as we have said all along, everybody knows we had certain coaches we liked and didn't like. But what we said is there's not one guy, right, at each position that is the only answer to the future of that position.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people need to understand is everybody knows my opinion on Andy Ludwig. But as I said all along, he was not the only guy that can do a good job at Notre Dame. He was one of guys, and you need to hire one of those guys. Same thing with offensive line. Joe Rudolph was not at the top of my offensive line list. Never hidden that fact. But as we've also said, but that's still an upgrade over what you had before Harry Hiestand came here.
Right.
And so that's what's interesting about this whole dynamic, Sean, is it's not about, okay, upgrade here, downgrade there, upgrade. It's about as a staff, as a whole, can they work together? And I think that's going to be a very interesting dynamic. And we don't know the answer to that. But I think the fact that there's more people that Marcus Freeman hired that say, you're going to believe and buy into what I want to do. I think that's something that's really going to help this team because you have buy-in because these are now all Marcus Freeman's hires. It's completely his. There's no conversation about, well, if it wasn't for this guy taking the job, Freeman never gets hired. Well, this guy was hired before Freeman. This guy was given autonomy. This guy was given that. And none of that's criticism on Tom Rees. That's criticisms on the process. The process sucked. And it created, to me, a power dynamic problem on that side of the ball. That's gone. For me, Sean, that's point number one in the check. And again, this is not a Tommy Rees shot. This is a Jack Swarbrick problem because he created it that way. But that dynamic right there, that there's no longer that dynamic of, okay, who's really in charge? Is this guy bought into this, that, or the other thing? That's gone. And to me, that's box number one when you start talking about is the staff as a whole in a better place because all 5 guys that are currently on staff were not Tommy Rees's. And remember, that was the other thing. Oh, this guy was a Tommy Rees hire or whatever else.
Right.
These are all Marcus Freeman guys now. And that's a very important, very, very important thing because we will not have the questions of who's in charge at Notre Dame. We know who's in charge. And now he's got one of his guys that's running the offense. He's got one of his guys coaching the offensive line. He's got one of his guys coaching the quarterbacks. And that's where Notre Dame's got to be. Again, not a shot on Coach Easton. Everybody knows my feelings on Coach Easton. It's not a shot on Tommy Rees. It's just that is gone now. Yeah. Whether Tommy Rees created that or not, I don't think that he did. I think Jack Swarbrick created that drama. I think some other nefarious people behind the scenes created that drama. I don't believe Tommy Rees was talking to media people saying, hey, you guys know that I'm really in charge here.
Right.
I can assure you that's never a conversation that I had with Tommy Rees, ever. He never had a, well, Marcus can't tell me what to do mentality. But other people created that nonsense, and it was allowed to grow because of the way that Jack Swarbrick had the process go. That's gone. That's out of there. I think that's where we have to start with this conversation, Sean.
I think Marcus Freeman has faced a lot of challenges. And I think what you're going to get, and I fully believe he's going to be highly motivated. He's already a highly motivated individual. No excuses, find answers. That's who he is. But I think now he has extra motivation just based upon a lot of things that have happened, in my opinion, going all the way back to his hiring, some of the things you talked about, even up until this day. He's coming into the spring highly motivated, already with the belief that this team in 2023 has a chance to be special. And that's why he decided to go out and make the move to bring in a transfer quarterback that ended up being Sam Hartman. So with all of that being said, his mindset and you talking about the continuity and the coaching staff being highly motivated as well. And I watched the energy, just, what the video they tweeted out with Jared Parker yesterday with the players, the energy with the coaches having and going back and competing against the players and simple things like cornhole and all of that. You love to see that. You say, well, man, what does that really mean? Because it has no connection to football. Okay, maybe they're not running plays. Maybe they're not lining up and blocking somebody. But camaraderie, being locked in and competing and sticking together and having a certain energy and synergy around the team, any coach will tell you, every team that was good that they had a certain energy. That really can't be explained because every coach, if they knew how to duplicate it, they would duplicate it on a year in and year out basis. No, but when people leave and other people come in, it changes the DNA. It changes the chemistry of the team. And this chemistry right now, this coaching staff, with everybody included, I think there's a bunker mentality.
Yeah,
being formed with this team.
And when you're in a bunker, Sean, you want to know you're in a bunker with people that are going to battle. Hey, when we make our decision to come out of this and fight our way out of this, I know you got my back. I know you're going to be on board with, hey, we're going right. We got to go right. We got to do this together, man. We can't all run around doing our own thing or we're going to get picked off one by one, right?
Right.
And I look at this and I say, one positive for me, and again, there's different ways to be successful. So when I say these things are different, it's not saying the previous way sucked and the new way is great. It's different, and it's a thing. It's how does it mesh together with everything? And I think the way that Jared Parker coaches, and the way that we anticipate him interacting with the players, again, demanding and hard, but just different. I think that's going to fit with the way Marcus Freeman wants players to be coached, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be true at a couple positions. And it's, again, not better, not worse. It's just different. And that's all those little things that kind of go into, I have a philosophy that of what I'm trying to build here. We don't know if it's going to work or not. We'll find that out with Coach Freeman, but he's getting more and more people on staff that are going to coach the way that he wants to coach.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a matter, again, not better, not worse, just this is the way that I want it. And I think that's going to impact the offense too. And honestly, Sean, I think the offense, for a lot of reasons, the offense has not been a confident unit for years. I thought it was a relatively confident unit in 2020, but it was a very veteran unit. I think Robert talked about that. He thought that 2020 was the best team that they had.
Yeah,
I would disagree with him. I think
I figured you would.
Part of it was, well, you played nobody, I mean, and so you dominated some bad teams. But I think the thing about it, though, is part of the reason I think they think that is because they had a bunker mentality, because of everything that happened that offseason with, is the season going to be canceled? What's our schedule going to look like? Those kids had to rally together.
Yeah.
And come together and say, hey, we're all working towards one goal. because otherwise you don't survive. And that's one thing we gave Brian Kelly a ton of credit for at the time, was to manage the way that season went down and keep that team together was one of the best coaching jobs Brian Kelly did during his tenure at Notre Dame, because of all the stuff that was happening that was outside of his and the team's control. And I think they had that bunker mentality that you're referring to, Sean.
Yeah.
And I think that matters. But the way that I think they're going to be coached is going to be one that's geared more towards, we've got to build up their confidence. And it doesn't mean that you're not demanding. It doesn't mean you don't set high expectations. It just means there are certain things that are a little more important than, we've got to make sure that we're running this concept or that concept, the other concept. And I think that's something that we're going to see as well. So that part's going to be a positive. Now, will these coaches be able to teach technique as well as some of the others? Will the scheme be as good? That I don't know. We'll have to find that out. But I do think at the foundational level, this is a positive for this offensive staff, is you now have a bunch of coaches that are going to be more on board with the way Marcus Freeman wants to do things. And now there's not that power struggle that was part of the program last year. And I would argue at no fault of any of the coaches. It's just It was a dynamic that was created on the outside. Because every time I say this, people think I'm taking a shot at Tommy Rees. I'm not. There is a power struggle that was created externally that I think hindered that group last year. And that's gone. There's no question who's in charge now. It's Marcus Freeman. And now the people being in charge are his guys. And I think that's going to be important, Sean, when we look at the big picture. But I think you also –
When was the last time Notre Dame had a top 10 offense?
In what metric? Efficiency or scoring?
Efficiency, scoring, and yardage. I'll take either three. I'll take top 10 in either category.
I believe –
going back to Charlie Weiss?
I believe it was 05. I think is the last time that was the case. And
okay.
I'm gonna look this up. So let me just because I can find that for you real quick. I know the 15 team ended up not being there in points. They were close for a while, but that fade down the stretch, kind of kept them out of that a little bit that year, Sean. But let me see where Notre Dame finished that year. 2019, they finished, I think, in the top 13th in scoring. That was the highest they've ever had. They averaged 36.8. Then they fired that offensive coordinator. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, they ended up 34th in scoring in 2015. So that team, like I said, they faded down the stretch. They were 32nd in 09. So let me look at the 09 Notre Dame team real quick. And they finished not 09, sorry. The 06 team finished 16th in scoring, and the 2005 team finished 8th in scoring that year. So Notre Dame did in fact finish 8th in scoring in that 2008 season. And then I'm going to look real quick, Sean, where they averaged in yards that year. Just give me 1 second. So let's go. That's 05. So 05, Notre Dame ranked 10th in total offense. So 8th in scoring offense, 10th in total offense. And then the next year they fell down to 23rd in total offense and fell out in scoring as well. So, yeah, that's the last time that we've seen Notre Dame really rank that high in total offense. So it's
a long time.
And I don't necessarily think they have to necessarily be 10th in the top 10, but I would say this: the closer you get to that, the better I'm going to feel about it.
Yeah.
That there's no question about that. Because and especially with points, I don't really care as much about yards because there's so many different metrics that go into yards. I mean, field position. If your average starting field position is at I said this before. I coached in a team, Muhlenberg College, where we averaged 40 points a game for most of the year, right? And I think we ended the year around 40. We scored 10 points in the second round of the playoffs against John Carroll, which took us down to like 38. But we averaged like 350 yards a game that year because our average starting field position was the 48-yard line.
Yeah.
Because our defense and special teams were so good. I care more about points and yards per play. So, for example, in 2015, the Notre Dame offense didn't finish anywhere close to the top 10 in total offense. They finished, let me see here, that Notre Dame that year finished in yards per game. Let me find it. They finished 27th in yards per game, but they were 6th that year in yards per play.
Okay.
So I care more about the yards per play and about efficiency numbers. And I do know that Notre Dame has had some teams in the past that have had good efficiency numbers on offense, but I don't know if they were necessarily top 10. Like 2020, they were 2021, they were 20th in offensive efficiency. They were 17th in 2020. So, those are good numbers, and obviously those teams were borderline playoff teams. They were 25 in 2019. They were, let's see here, where were they in? They were 28th in 2018. So, I mean, so you're getting the point, Sean, that like they've had good offenses, 12th in 2017, which is what I think the best Notre Dame team was. They just played a much tougher schedule. They ranked 12th in 2017 in offensive efficiency. So to me, so in 2015, for example, Sean, they ranked 7th in offensive efficiency. And so I think you look at a lot of factors of what keeps you down. So there's been a couple years here and there, but what have you and I always said the two best Notre Dame teams were the last 10 years, in our opinion? I think we both agreed on this. It was 17, or the two best Notre Dame offenses, excuse me, in the last 10 years was 17 and 15.
15, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, those years we've also said, boy, if the defense was better or if this was better, this team has a shot to be really special.
Yeah.
And so that's where this offense has to get to, right? And it's got to be explosive and it's got to be efficient. Now, can these coaches get them there? We're going to find out. But I will say this, the more and more I learn about these coaches, including coaches that I wasn't on board with, right? Like I was fine with Jared Parker being hired. I literally wrote an article after the Andy Ludwig fiasco saying Freeman just needs to say, screw this process and just promote Jared Parker because he thinks that he needs to surround himself with people that he can trust. Now, do you think I wrote that article thinking that Jared Parker's some bum that can't coach football? No. Was he my first choice? No. But do I think he's a smart football coach that has a lot of tools that you look for when you're trying to promote an offensive coordinator? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I even said then he needs to go out and hire Gino Guidugli, somebody he knew. And then later that day, we find out that, that's exactly what he's going to do. And I said he needs to hire an offensive line coach that he has a connection with. Now, were there other offensive line coaches that I liked more than Joe Rudolph? Yes, there were. Did Marcus Freeman have connections with those other coaches? No, he did not. And so I understand why he made that hire. But the more we talk to people that I do respect, that I do know, that I do trust, you start saying, okay, I get more and more and more why he made those decisions. But the pressure's on him because because the reality is, Sean, the perception is such of the way the process went down. And I know that some Notre Dame fans don't see it this way because they're just like, whatever it happens that Notre Dame does, it's perfect, it's wonderful, it's great. And if you say otherwise, you're a hater. That's fine, whatever. Recruits don't feel that way. Other coaches that may want to come to your program don't feel that way. Voters don't feel that. A lot of people on the outside don't feel that way. And that perception matters. It's that this whole process was flawed. And in a lot of ways it was.
Yeah.
But with that past, you look at the coaches and you say, I know this guy and respect this guy, and he tells me that my opinion of Joe Rudolph is too demand. I'm too critical of him. Well, that matters to me more than some dude on Twitter saying that to me, right? And saying, hey, your points are valid, but and this is what I've gotten mostly from coaches I know, Sean, your points are valid on what the Wisconsin line looked like, but a big part of that was something that was going on here, and here that was outside of his control, or at least because he was being, divided into this. He was also doing this. He was also doing that. But if you just let that guy coach your line, you're going to like what you see. So you listen to that and you hear that. And if you respect people, and you have to be open-minded enough to say, okay, I see what you're saying. I see some of what you're saying on film. And so I feel better about it. So that's the thing is I'm trying to have as open mind as possible with some of these hires, right? But the reality is Marcus Freeman got guys that he believes in, and that's the big key. And I want to continue this conversation on into let's transition into the position aspects of it, Sean.
Yeah.
And I'll let you respond first because I do think we need to start with the O-line because I'm gonna make a statement, Sean, and I want you to either destroy me or tell me why I might be onto something here. Everybody knows my affinity for Harry Hiestand as an offensive line coach. And it's valid. It's justified. I don't know anyone that actually knows football that has a difference of opinion on this, right? Harry Hiestand was one of the best offensive line coaches in the business. Nobody that knows football feels any differently, in my opinion, or that I've ever seen voice that. I'm going to say this, however. The offensive line situation is better going into 2023 than it was going into 2022. And the biggest reason why is no, I do not think Joe Rudolph is Harry Hiestand. But because Harry Hiestand came in and just changed everything, rebuilt it, that Joe Rudolph at his level is inheriting a much better situation than what Harry Hiestand inherited. And if what people tell me about Joe Rudolph is correct, and I'm going with what the people I respect are telling me, I'm giving them benefit out. I'm now on board with Joe Rudolph being the O-line guy because of what all these people. There's just too many people that I respect telling me that I need to rethink my point of view for me to ignore it.
Yeah.
There just is, right? And that includes Malik, but there's a lot of other people in the coaching world that are telling me that. So I'm on board now. I'm giving them benefit of the doubt. But if they're right about him, and you look at the foundation that he's inheriting and how much better it is than the complete overhaul that Harry Hiestand had to do a year ago, I think the offensive line room today is in a much better position going into 23 than it was into 22. And I think that's where the foundation has to start, Sean.
Well,
So
you're not tearing anything down. Yeah, Harry
Right.
Hiestand came in, and I think he gave pause to Joe Alton, Blake Fisher, because he understood, wait a minute, hold on. I know you guys are ready to make them all Americans, but there's some things I need to tear down or improve upon before they start moving forward and getting better. And there were some other things going on that we were questioning whether or not he would actually blend with Blake Fisher. And that ended up being a positive that Blake Fisher did take to his style of coaching. So for me, they're in a much better place because of something that was pointed out by one of their top O-line recruits in the 23 class, which is on his visit in April. He said, look, Harry, he's saying coaches the backups just as hard as he coaches the starters. And he said, I didn't see that everywhere that I went on a visit. So for me, Joe Rudolph is walking into a room not only with 3 established starters and 2 All-American tackles, he's walking into a room where the backups have a sound foundation.
Right.
So now the competition and the depth in that room should be pretty amazing for Joe Rudolph.
And
For
those
him to have
tackles you talked
versatility,
about, Sean, real quick, those tackles you talked about, build on this too, please. They weren't those guys a year ago.
No.
They were built into that.
Yeah, and that's why Harry told us to pause when we were trying to say, they're going to be All-Americans as sophomores. And Joe Alt, he played very well. Blake Fisher, a little inconsistent early, got much better down the stretch and started to form into the guy, the dominant run blocker and pass blocker that we think he can be. But with all of that, I think big picture, the room is in a much better place than it was when Harry took over for Jeff Quinn just this time over a year ago. And from a recruiting standpoint, I think they're in a better place as well than they were just a year ago. I think Harry put them back on the right path from a recruiting standpoint with the guys he got in the 23 class, even though he lost some guys for one ridiculous reason, and then another reason, a guy just decided to transfer and stay closer to home, which is what he wanted to do in the first place. With all of that being said, there's so much talent and depth in this offensive line room. And Joe Rudolph coming in, having 2 positions to fill, has versatility.
Yeah.
And that for him, he comes in saying, look, I get to allow these kids to compete, and then I get to choose how I want to use these guys. And like you said, we talked to Robert Hainsey yesterday. He talked about how important it was for him to come in as an early enrollee, and that's the only way he was able to play week 1 against Temple. It's the same thing with Joe Rudolph. Maybe not early enrollees, but having these guys go through a Harry Hiestand system and going through that same thing with Matt Bayless, building towards that system for another offseason. By the time he gets his hands on them, they should be pretty sound and fundamental. And now you can go and work and let these guys build on that. This offensive line should be pretty good. I mean, we can sit up here and play musical chairs with names to see who's going to play left guard, who's going to play right guard. Does Zeke Correll stay at center? Do they move him to guard? It's going to be very interesting to see how this thing shakes out. But yeah, Joe Rudolph is in a very advantageous situation as an offensive line coach. It's not too many offensive line rooms I would rather walk in than the one Notre Dame has.
Well, another thing too that from what you and I broke the other night, Sean, is one of the things that came screaming through to the players during their meeting with Joe Rudolph is the things he believes in and the things he teaches are very, very. I mean, every coach has. There's no coach that's exactly the same way another coach was.
Yeah,
I don't care if you were coaching that guy for 10. If Harry Hiestand doesn't leave this year and he coaches 2 more years, and Chris Watt serves under him, and then Chris Watt takes over, Chris Watt will teach a lot of things similarly, but he's still going to do it his
his
way.
way. Yeah,
So, but when you hear the players being fired up about the fact that what Rudolph believes in, the foundation, the way he teaches, and all those type of things is makes them think, hey, that's just like Harry. That matters.
yeah,
And so that adds to the content. It's a different voice, and there's going to be certain drills that are done a little bit differently and all that kind of stuff. But the foundation is going to be strong. So again, he's not the concern is if you bring in a guy, and this was one of my biggest concerns with Joe Rudolph, is looking at the offense. I was concerned about with how much pin and pull they do that
mhm,
you'd have to kind of start over a little bit. And then you go back and you really dive into the film and you see in past years, they did a lot more mid zone, a lot more. They did more duo. They did more things that fits in with what they're trying to do. That matters because I don't want to just completely redo the offensive line again. Like when
yeah,
Harry came in the first time, part of the task was you got to redo what we're doing. They were a pin and pull team. And Kelly wanted to be more of a downhill, inside and outside zone counter power type of not power scheme, but power philosophy type of team, which they weren't under Ed Warner. Now Ed Warner did some nice things, but it was just a different philosophy.
yeah,
And so Coach Easton was brought in to overhaul and completely change that. And I didn't want that to happen with a new offensive line coach. It's kind of like, dude, don't F this up. It was kind of the mentality. And that's what Joe Rudolph is being tasked to do. So I'm going to go out on a limb and start right there, Sean, and say that that the offensive line is in a better situation now than it was a year ago. Now we could
yeah,
debate would it have been better if Hiestand would have stayed? That it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's about comparing it to last year, and is the offensive line still projecting in a positive direction with this hire? And it's hard for me to say it isn't, especially since the fact that the one thing we all do agree on with Joe Rudolph, he's going to be a really good recruiter.
yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So,
That is his record wherever he's been.
right.
He can recruit the position. And I'll
Right.
tell you what, it's very similar. And some people might say it might be apples to oranges, but I'll dig out what I want to dig out from the situation. It's almost like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were going to be great shooters. It didn't matter if Mark Jackson was coaching them or Steve Kerr. It didn't matter. They were going to be great shooters, all-time great shooters in the history of the NBA, right? Maybe Steve Kerr just unlocked certain potential things schematically that he gained from working with great coaches like Greg Popovich or Phil Jackson. Okay, maybe he gave them that motion and movement, all right? Who's to say Joe Rudolph can't come in and give certain things that are beneficial by identifying the talent that he has? What if he has some really good athletic guards like Shroud and Christophic as a combination? Like, man, these guys can really move their feet. I got to do some pin and pull. I got to pull them. I got to use their athleticism in some way, form, or fashion. It might not be exactly what we're going to do as far as who we are, but every now and then I'm going to take advantage of what they can do as a wrinkle. And we talked about those wrinkles. So, you have to be excited because you have an experienced coach, right? You he, he's going to identify the talent that he has. He's going to watch film from last year. He's going to watch Clemson and say, "Yep, okay, yep, yep, I got something to work with
I
here."
don't know what I did to the football gods to deserve going from where I was at
Well,
Virginia Tech to this, but thank you.
exactly. But
Thank
thank
you.
you. So, look, there is, I think, going back to what you talked about, the offensive efficiency, the points per game, and the play yards per play. This offensive line is going to be more impactful, in my opinion, with Notre Dame's offensive efficiency this season. I think they're going to give Jared Parker a comfort zone to be able to ease himself into the schedule and ease himself up to the big games to be able to then kind of expand and do a lot of things as they go throughout the season. I think Notre Dame is going to come out and just overwhelm people early on. I really do. Just from a talent standpoint, offensive line standpoint, running back standpoint, they're just going to come at you in waves, in waves.
And that's the pressure to me, Sean, that's on Joe Rudolph. Is that right
Mhm.
there?
Yeah,
Is Marcus Freeman needs to be right about him, because if this team is going to reach its potential, that's exactly what they need to do,
yeah.
like from jump. And now the nice thing that this line will have that last year's line didn't have, it's a bit of a warm up, right? Where last year's line, you're trying to overcome what Jeff Quinn had built or
Mhm.
tore down, and you're trying to rebuild it, and you've got to do it in week 1 against Ohio State, in week 2 against Marshall's pretty good, pretty good defensive football team last year, a team that won like 9 or 10 games last year.
Yeah.
Now, again, they should have been much better than they were. That's not the argument I'm trying to have, but I'm making the point that, like, they were able to work through they'll be able to work through their growing pains, and every team has growing pains come out to start a season. They're going to be able to work through their growing pains
Mhm.
against a completely different type of team. And I think that matters. And it's also ironic, I feel, that, like, one of the guys we're talking about, like Billy Schrouth, who we expect to be a starter, is now going to be coached by a guy that recruited him. The previous Notre Dame coach didn't recruit him,
Mhm.
uh, as far as the offensive line coach. So I think that's an interesting dynamic as well. But they need to be right on that, because they need the offensive line to play that way. But here's the other part of it. If the offensive line plays great, Notre Dame's going to be pretty good this year.
Yeah.
But I don't care about pretty good. This is Notre Dame. This is a place where you talk about championships, right? And competing for championships.
Yeah.
Now you dive into quarterback. And I think that we're just talking quarterback, period, not offensive coordinator, just quarterback. This is going to be an interesting one as well, because there's two dynamics here at play. Number one is you have a much better room than you did a year ago. With all due respect to Drew Pine, to Steve Angeli, you're walking in a room where you now have Sam Hartman and Tyler Buckner at the top of the depth chart, not Tyler Buckner, an unproven Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine. And then number 3 is a true freshman, Steve Angeli.
Mhm.
Now it's Sam Hartman, Tyler Buckner, and a year 2 Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie, where last year your number 4 was Ron Paulus III, and now it's Kenny Minchie. There's no area on the 4 that's a bigger difference in talent than at 4 with Kenny Minchie and Ron Paulus III, with all due respect. So to me, the talent upgrade is enormous. But now you have a situation where you have a coach that's specifically geared towards coaching them up.
Mhm.
I don't think that matters much to Sam Hartman. I think Sam Hartman needs to adjust his footwork in the pocket to get away from the slow mesh. But overall, I don't think it's a huge change for him. My question here is, will this be a big improvement for Tyler Buckner? And the reason that I bring it up is all we really have to study Gino Guidugli as a coach is what he did with Desmond Ridder. Like that's the only quarterback he really brought in and
Yeah.
developed over a 4-year period. That's it.
Yeah.
And he was a really raw kid who was considered an athlete by 247, not even a quarterback,
Yeah.
coming out of high school. He was ranked in the thousands, I believe, if I remember correctly. And he turned him into this really raw kid, into a player that I was never the biggest Desmond Ridder fan for a million reasons, but as a senior, he became a pretty good football player,
Yeah.
and a guy that was able to lead a team to the college football playoff. Came into Notre Dame Stadium, played cool as a cucumber, and made some big money throws against Notre Dame. And a guy that went from a very raw, toolsy but raw player that was ranked as the number 1,657 player in the country, and he turned him into a college football playoff quarterback and a third-round draft pick who's now starting in the National Football League. Does that sound like anyone we know, Sean? A really toolsy, raw kid that needs to be taught how to use his feet correctly and be
Yeah.
consistent with his throwing motion. Does that sound like anybody we know? Tyler Buckner,
Mhm.
So I think that's the guy that could ultimately benefit the most in regard to the potential of Gino Guidugli is he has experience working with this type of quarterback where
Yes.
Tom Reese loved Tyler Buckner.
Yeah.
But Tommy Rees had no track record of being able to take that type of player and turning him into a really good player.
Yeah.
Coach Gaduli does. We saw it. And, to me, that's
And
that's gonna be
now
interesting.
Tyler, Kenny, Steve, they all have the opportunity to go directly to someone and say, "Hey, can you watch film with me?" And it's not pulling that coach away from his main priority.
Right.
Like, this is my job. This is why I'm here. Of course, let's go watch film. We watch film all day, every day. Let's go. Let's do it. And that is the benefit. Seeing him, because Tyler will struggle sometimes in seeing things. I think we saw that with the pick six down on the goal line with the motion and what he should have seen and expected by watching the safety and where he should have gone with the ball. Those are things that will come not only with watching film, but reps as well. But on top of that, just cleaning up footwork. Look, I don't know. Tyler Buckner is a very confident young man. You don't come back from the things he came back from in that Gator Bowl unless you have confidence in yourself, regardless of what other people think about you. So, with that type of gumption, if he can really grab hold to things and Gino Gaduli can improve step by step, because now there's really, I think Tyler will play. You would be a fool to have Tyler on the sideline and not have some type of package
Agree.
on a week to week basis. Like, come on, you have to be. Let's be smarter than that. Especially in short distance, red zone, things of that nature. Absolutely, Tyler Buckner should play every week, every week. But on top of that, now he does not have the pressure of feeling like, man, I have to be the guy. I have to
Right.
put this offense
The
on
whole
my
way of the
shoulders.
world
It's on
bingo.
my shoulders.
That's it
Now he
right
can
there.
just go play. He can play, and by all means, young man, please stay healthy.
Well, and
Please.
Sean, this is the first time Tyler Buckner's ever been doubted. I think that's the other
I think
interesting
that's a good
dynamic
point. That's a
is,
good point.
his first 2 years, really, there was people that, oh, this guy's going to be this, and he's going to be great, and he's going to be phenomenal. He's going to do that. He's going to do all these other type of things. And, I remember, you bench Jack Cohn for Tyler Buckner.
Yeah.
Remember that absurdity from year one? And Heisman Trophy and look, the expectations were sky high for him last year and should have been with most people, not all people. Everyone's going to have their doubters and haters and stuff like that, and legitimate critics. But there's always been a level of optimism around Tyler Buckner. Well, now a lot of that's gone, unjustifiably so, in my opinion. There's a lot of negativity around him. Well, he can't pass, he can't do this, can't do that. He turns the ball over too much, and some of that's fair and some of it's not. And so there's never been this kind of adversity for Tyler Buckner. And I think this is why I say if Tyler Buckner stays at Notre Dame and finishes his career at Notre Dame, I think you're going to look at this period as the thing that changed his future, in my view. Because he was finally taking out of the savior role and put into, hey man, let's take a step back and develop this thing a little bit. Let's get you sound. Let's get you fundamentally sound. Let's work on it. And that's something I think Coach Rees started to work on when he got back late in the year. They started working on the footwork and some things like that. And so you saw Tyler make some throws in that game that he was missing earlier in the season because there were those improvements, right?
Yeah.
And so now you get to continue to build on that, but as you said, Sean, in an even more direct way. So even if you're someone who thought Tommy Rees was a great quarterbacks coach, and I'm a lot higher on Tommy Rees as a coordinator than I am as a quarterbacks coach at this point in time.
That's fair.
Those are two different things.
Yeah.
And so to me, Gino's track record to me is good. I mean, but again, we're working off what he did with one guy, right? And that, fair or unfair, but the point is that one guy has a lot more in common with Tyler Buckner than what Drew Pine has or Sam Hartman has or whatever in regard to what are the needs to get him to that next level. And so when I look at it, Sean, I think that's a big plus for me. So talent in the room and having a quarterbacks coach that I think is going to be able to enhance the technical part of it is, to me, where I think quarterback is in a much better place now than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
is the talent alone puts it in a great spot. I mean, Gino Guidugli would have to be a bum of a coach to not get this right in 2023, in my opinion. And I don't think that's true. He has a very good reputation in this business. So
yeah.
very, I'd say just looking at it from a quarterback's coaching and a quarterback depth chart standpoint, it's hard for me to say that's not an upgrade.
Mhm.
I mean, look, we saw his quarterback and Tommy Reese's quarterback go head to head a year ago, and whose quarterback made more plays?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And honestly, I thought the Cincinnati offense in the third quarter took their foot off the gas.
yes,
Honestly,
I
like once
think
they jumped out, yeah,
after that fumble that Notre Dame ran back,
yeah,
I think Cincinnati said, we're not going to put them in position where their defense can make we know their offense can't score on us.
right.
We're not going to put them in a position where their defense can make another play and set us up.
Which was
Set them
crazy
up for
because
a
they
score.
took the first series Notre Dame and went right down the field.
And then that
Right.
interception just,
The
yeah.
interception just zapped everything. Yeah, but that goes to show you what we said earlier. Your offense has to be, if the defense is the jab in this heavyweight fight against good teams from Notre Dame, then man, you got to have something else. You have to have a hook or something to really stun the other teams and make them take a step back and not be so confident to just come in and be aggressive to say, okay, like, whoa. And it's been the defense the majority of the time in games where teams will say, okay, we're not going to allow their defense, or this year against USC, we're not about to allow their special teams to have an impact on this game.
Right.
They're just not. We're going to pooch kick. We're going to keep our offense on the field. Their special teams is really the only thing we're worried about that can really
Right.
change the tide of this game.
And the one team that went against Notre Dame that thought they had special teams that could match Notre Dame's ended up getting burned.
Mm-hmm.
Worked out well for them early with the fake
Early. Yeah.
punt, touchdown, all that, but
Yeah.
they caught it the rest of the game. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
talk about the fake that went for big, the fact that they got 2 flipping delay game penalties because they were so panicked over Notre Dame's pump block situation. So yes, even that one team that thought, no, we can go toe to toe with them on special teams. By the second half of that game, I was like, yeah, that's probably not smart. But like the point is though, Sean, to your point is you've got to have something else that teams fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And last year, Notre Dame didn't have that on either side of the ball.
No.
Sam Hartman and Tyler Buckner, from a talent standpoint, give them 2 quarterbacks capable of being that. Can they be coached up and prepared well? That's the question we're going to find out. But I think from what we know of Gino, from what I've heard about Coach Guidugli, from other people, from what you've heard about Coach Guidugli, from people in the business, I think that part's going to be an upgrade as well. I do. And those to me right there, Sean, are the 2 big things for me that look. I look at this and I say, man, like they can't be great without that. They can't. And they're going to need to be great to get there. And that's the pressure that's on Coach Guidugli. Because it's interesting is, the 2 new hires on offense, the only 2 new hires on offense are literally coaching the 2 positions that hold Notre Dame's championship dreams in their hands. And that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
Quarterback and offensive line. They can't compete with that.
Right.
I do think there's some other positions that I look at and say the one position where I think Notre Dame's going to take a downgrade next year, and it doesn't matter if John Mackey was reborn and was coaching the Notre Dame tight ends. When you lose Michael Mayer, you're not going to be as good next year.
No,
it's not. So and then you wonder, okay, well, if Coach Parker is also the OC, does that kind of take away a little bit? So that's where the GA role is going to be important. But it's a lot easier to have an OC that is the tight ends coach than it is the quarterback's coach, because I'd have a lot more faith in the OC coaching tight ends or receivers than the other way around. And I've said this before. One of the things that helped that 2015 offense is Mike Denbrock was the receivers coach, but he had a GA on that team named Ryan Mahaffey, who I thought did a great job with the receivers that year. And was, I mean, that guy's going to be a really good football coach. Well, he ends up leaving to go to Western Kentucky. Then he becomes the offensive coordinator at Northern Iowa like 2 years later. He's now an assistant offensive line coach with I think the Packers now, right? So, he's gone up because I think he was He was a really sharp
But
coach.
they
And
really
that
have that
helped.
offensive line tight under the umbrella, right? Because you point out Jared Parker being able to coach them, but heck, Joe Rudolph coached tight ends.
Well, that was going to be my other point too, Sean, is tight end is much easier to say, hey, during this period, I need you guys to go work with the offensive line.
Right,
During this
right.
period, I need Holden Stace and I need this guy to go over here and work with Coach
With the
Stuckey and the
receivers.
receivers.
Yes.
Right. Well, you can't do that with the quarterbacks, really.
No.
I mean, if you want them to still get coached up. So, because the receivers coach could take the quarterbacks, the running backs coach could take the quarterbacks, and we're going to work on handoff drills. But Thielen McCall is not getting under there and teaching the technique of the quarterbacks. Maybe Chancey Stuckey could,
He probably could.
but it's a different. He's not teaching what he knows. He'd have to step outside of what he's hired to do. Whereas Chancey Stuckey teaching the tight ends on the proper way to attack the leverage of a safety playing off the hash is going to be no different than what he's teaching his receivers.
Absolutely.
All those things, there's carryover. Joe Rudolph teaching the tight ends on the proper footwork on a reach block against a wide, against a 9 technique or against a linebacker walked up is going to be the same exact thing he's teaching to his tackles on that aspect. That's what's unique. And so that's where I'd rather have an OC doing that than trying to coach the whole offensive line or coach even to, I personally like the quarterback dynamic because that's what I did. But in this instance, I think that they needed someone in this particular instance. Not that they needed, they're going to benefit from having a guy directed right at them.
Absolutely.
And maybe not Sam Hartman as much as Buckner and Minchie. To me, it's going to be key. So that's an interesting dynamic to it, Sean. Receiver.
Which area do you think the quarterback will impact the most? Efficiency, points per game, or yards per play?
Well, I think it's the efficiency part is the foundation of all of that. And then that will lead to greater yards per play, which will then lead to more points. It's kind of how I think that builds. Like, give me a group that's more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to lead to more explosives, in my view, because there's several ways. Number one is a more efficient offense. You're usually a more fundamentally sound offense.
Mm-hmm.
You're more consistent in how you go about your business every play, which means the times that the opponent makes mistakes, you're in better position to take advantage of them. For example, there was once or twice a game last year, Notre Dame's opponent would blow coverage, and you and I would see it, and they wouldn't take advantage of the quarterback wasn't able or willing to make that play.
Yeah,
that's not going to be the case this year. You're going to have a quarterback that can do that. So I expect, and you're going to have a more dynamic receiving core. Lorenzo Styles is going to be a junior now. Tobias Merriweather's going into year 2. I made my prediction on him the other day. I think he's going to be the guy that we're all talking about. I said that on Tuesday night. Monday night. Was it Monday night or Tuesday night that we had that show? But it was Tuesday night.
Tuesday night.
So I look at it there, Sean, and I say the explosives I expect to be there because all your dudes are back.
Right.
And they're a year older and all that, but it's the efficiency that's the problem because efficiency also leads to more 2nd and 2s, more 3rd and 1 situations where you can take more chances to create the explosives. So that's why I always mention when I say efficient and explosive offense, I always say it in that order for a reason because I think the efficiency part has to come first.
Yeah,
and that's where how you prepare every single day. And just your mentality, your confidence, the consistency with which you go about your business is so important.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that's what made Harry Hiestand such a great line coach was you knew what you were going to do every day. You knew what was important that day, every single day.
Yeah.
You hear similar things about Joe Rudolph. That's a positive, right? They got to know every single day this matters. There can be no day off for proper footwork. There can be no day off for proper technique. There can be no day off for toughness. There can be no day off for hard work. There can be no day off for giving you everything I got. Maybe there can be days off from we're not going to run you as much, days off where we're not going to run as many plays, days off we're going to pull the reins back on the tempo of today's practice. All that stuff we can change from day to day depending on what the needs are. But the focus, the footwork, the technique, the toughness, that has to be just who you are, right? And so to me, I look at it that way, Sean, and say, if they can get that out of this offense, the talent is there.
Yeah.
Is this a coaching staff capable of getting it there? And I think that this is a coaching staff that is not going to have a lot of egos in it from that standpoint of it's got to be my way type of thing. I think you're going to have a much better hey, this guy, that guy might have an idea. Let's see if we can make that work. I think that's important because you have a lot of smart guys in the room. And I think you have 3 guys that have called plays or been
Mhm.
coordinators before
Yeah.
on the offense this year. So I think that's going to be something that's very important. So, receiver, I expect it to be better. Sean, I think that's a given. Coach Stuckey getting the same guys in year 2. They're deeper now because of the freshmen.
Yeah.
The question is Jared Parker going to run the offense in a way that makes it more conducive for freshmen and young guys to play? That remains to be seen. I'm hopeful and optimistic it's going to be the case. And then the running back room is I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I was telling him like, "Yo, I think you're off on the running back room. I'm telling you, this is going to be the best one of the best running back rooms in college football, in my opinion." And so those parts we're feel good about, Sean. And so this is a bit of a hot take, but I really believe that the Notre Dame offense is in much, much better shape now than it was a year ago for a host of reasons, some of
Yeah.
which is because of the new coaches and
Mhm.
some of which is the foundation that was laid by coaches who are no longer here.
Look, you talk about the running backs. I think we've seen, and I remember going to spring practice and saying to myself, like, yo, this big kid has some really great feet. And I remember the first 2 practices, I kept saying that. I kept saying that. And you're like, really? I'm like, yeah, Aldrich Esme, as big as he is, his feet are really good for his size. And then you see him go on throughout the season, and he's gotten so much better. But I want to point out, I think the improvement we saw from Logan Diggs this past season as a running back, Logan Diggs became a tough, don't go down after the first contact, get extra yardage, every down running back. I mean, there were times where he was a workhorse in a
Mhm.
couple of games when they needed him to be. And he just did his thing. And just the love that they have for each other in that room. And they push each other and they want each other to be the best. Like, man, that's what I'm talking about. That synergy. Like you can go get talent. That's fine. But you have the synergy in that room along with the talent, and then the young talent they have. Like, we don't know, no one knows how Jadarian Price is going to recover from what most would say is a pretty significant leg injury,
That
especially for
still
a
has
running
a
back.
little bit more can have more lingering effects than a
Absolutely.
torn ACL.
Absolutely. But he is in a position where he does not have to come in and be rushed. And you
Right.
can bring him back at the rate he needs to come back at. And then Jeremiah Love, man, look, I promise you, the first rep he goes through when he gets to campus, coaches are going to be like, okay,
That looks different
yep, that's different.
because it's not just fast, but it's 6'1" fast.
Absolutely.
Here's going to be the interesting dynamic that I'm curious to see this year, Sean. And this has to do with Dylan McCullough and Jared Parker. We know what Logan and Audric can do. And to your point, you talk about being a workhorse.
Yeah.
In the last 7 games of the year, Logan had 28, 20, 17, 13, 15, 12, and 13 carries
Hmm.
in those games. If you look at his total touches in those games, let me see here, all purpose right here. So if you look at those, it's what 28, 20, 20, 17, 13, 16, 15, and 15 in total touches. That's workhorse numbers in today's era, right? It just is. And you talk about the game against UNLV where they're coming back from a loss to Stanford. Audric Estime fumbles again. He gets benched,
Hmm.
and Logan goes out there and carries the ball 28 times for 130 yards,
Yeah.
and then comes back the next week and carries the ball 20 times, and then comes back the next week against Clemson and carries the ball 17 times. And there was you talk about showing a level of physicality that he didn't necessarily show early in the year. I think a lot of that had to do with his gaining more confidence in his shoulder,
His shoulder. Yeah.
which is what we talk. I mean, there was the play against, I think it was Marshall, where he's to the right of a blitzer. So the blitzer's coming through. No, he's to the left of a blitzer. No, hold on, his left arm was hurt. Okay, so no, he was to the right of a blitzer. And that guy's coming in. Now you're going to step with that lead arm to block him. he turned his shoulder and tried to throw his other shoulder into the guy and
Yeah.
whiffed.
Yeah.
Like, that's a dude that's not confident in the injured shoulder. And we said they need to take him out until he's better. He misses
Right.
the next week with an illness and then comes back the next week showing some different things. And then a month later, it's like, that's just a different dude. And now what had me so hyped up on this kid and had me ranking him as high as I ranked him coming into high school,
Yeah.
which is a borderline top 100 recruit, you're seeing it now.
Yeah.
And then you throw in Audric and his ability to bounce back. That's one thing that I loved about what Coach McCullough did last year, is to get those kids to buy into their roles and to bounce back from adversity. Audric Estime could have easily quit on himself in the team last year with the fumble issues, and then because he had a big fumble against North Carolina, he had a big fumble against Stanford, and then he comes out against UNLV and puts it on the ground again. And you're like, okay, this is just, you can't do this anymore. And then he bounces back the next week, plays great against Syracuse, plays great against Clemson. But then also Logan to come back from the shoulder injury and his early season struggles, to get Chris Tyree to buy into a role that you and I both know Chris Tyree wasn't happy about, but he bought in because he was, that team mentality. But the thing that I look at this and say, okay, this is all fine and dandy. Here's the reality of it. I love Audric and Logan, but the test for Dylan McCullough and Jared Parker is, behind those two workhorses who are very good, you got 3 straight home run hitters. How are you going to use them? How are you going to build them into what you're doing on a daily basis? That is going to be a big test for me. And I'm very, very curious, Sean, to kind of see how he learns to do that or not. That's going to be something that I'm very curious about, because how well he does that is ultimately going to determine just how good this offense will or won't be.
Is that philosophical?
It is.
Or is that just like playmaking and calling plays at the right time? Because we talk about all the time how Lou would just pound you with Rodney Culver, Tony Brooks, Ricky Waters early in the game and just wear you out, and then would just go pitch left, pitch right with Rocket in the fourth quarter. And your linebacker.
Lou Samoji used to talk about that all the time. He would wear him down and then put Rocket in there. And now all of a sudden, Rocket's 4.25 turns into 4.15 because you're tired and he's fresh.
You're tired and he's fresh.
It's philosophical. See, I'm a believer that philosophy always leads to play calling. And that's to say that has to be there first. What you believe in should lead to what you call. Why am I calling this play on 3rd and 1? Because I believe that that this is who we are. And then what we have scouted has led to me in a conviction that this is where we need to go with at that time. It's not looking at you like, what do I think is going to work here? No, your philosophy leads you to the level of preparation that leads you to where you know exactly what we're doing in this 3rd and 1 situation, because we've practiced it, we've repped it, we've taught it, and this is what we're going with. And it's that conviction. Sean, there were times, if you go back and watch the Lou Holtz era, where everybody knew what was coming. And they still couldn't stop it. Now, was it just that Notre Dame players were just that much better? It's part of it. But it's also the players had a conviction that if we do this the way the coaches taught us to do it, nobody can stop us.
Yeah.
And that comes from philosophy, whether it's throwing the football, running the football, situational football, whatever the case may be. There has to be a foundational level of confidence in yourself, but also in what you're being taught to do.
Yeah.
And that's partly what led to Harry Hiestand's brilliance. Is it wasn't just that he's a great offensive line coach. He knew how to get buy-in. And this is what we said on Tuesday night was so important about how that interview went with Joe Rudolph, because coming out of that meeting, Joe Rudolph is now going to show up on campus with buy-in.
Yeah.
Why did the players buy into Harry Hiestand? Because the veterans knew him and they knew the legacy that he had established. It was an easy thing to do. It's going to be harder with Joe Rudolph because he doesn't have that established reputation with this group and at this school. So it was important that in that meeting that he had with the players, that they came out of it with a buy-in, because that's the very foundational step that and this is something I think hurt Al Washington last year. I don't think there was buy-in, the level of buy-in you need with older players.
Yeah.
And if the older players aren't bought in, it's going to be a little harder for the younger players to completely be bought in. And you're just not going to be as effective as a coach as you need to be.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see now in year 2, now that some of those guys that maybe they butted heads with are not there anymore.
Yeah.
Is there more buy-in? Is the buy-in lead to more conviction that this move is going to work against this guy, as opposed to, well, I'm going to do this because coach told me to, but I know it's not going to work. Well, it's definitely not going to work now,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that's an important aspect of this. And that's also the key for Jared Parker is, can you get buy-in?
Yeah.
Can your players believe that, hey, look, whatever situation we get in, I have faith in Coach Parker that he's going to put me in position to be successful. Look, you're seeing it in this pettiness going on Twitter. First of all, players, get off freaking Twitter ripping your coaches. You know dang well you'd be crying and bitching and moaning if coaches were saying things publicly about you the way that you're saying about right?
Yeah.
So, hey, there we go. But like this whole thing, like with CJ Johnson Gardner and his, how about you put us in bed? That to me is a player that doesn't have faith in his coach,
Right.
which is going to lead to you making a mistake as a player,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, with all due respect, that guy, those guys for the Chiefs don't get that wide open just because the scheme. It's also you not buying into, you thinking you know what you're going to do here and doing what you're going to do. There has to be a level of buy-in to where I don't care what the situation calls. I have no opinion on the matter because I believe my coach, and he says on this third down pass rush against this tackle, when he sets this way, I got to hit him with this. And if you believe in that and you believe what you're taught, then you're going to hit him with that, and there's going to be conviction, and you're going to win.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be a big part, and that's where something from everything I've been told from my sources within the team and people that used to be part of the team and all and coaches and different people that I know, I think that's going to be the biggest aspect of what Jared Parker brings to the table is there's at least going to be buy-in. Now, he's got to do the job, and he's got to scheme, and he's got to have the right philosophy, and he's got to have the right practice preparation, the right practice plans, and all that kind of stuff. That's all going to be part of how we evaluate the level of success he will or will not have. But I don't think buy-in is going to be an issue. And I think that's one of the reasons. And honestly, I was, as people I knew and respected were talking to me about, you need to think about this and maybe watch this film, watch that game, maybe consider this thing in regard to Joe Rudolph. One of the things that really convinced me to say, okay, I'm ready to roll with this and see how it goes, was what we reported Tuesday night. Is when players because like there's this expression, right? Like, I don't know what I don't know. And a lot of players don't really know what greatness is because they've never been around it. They don't know what it means to be a great player or a great worker or have a great coach because you only know what you've been around. With the Notre Dame offensive lineman, they've been around greatness. They've been around one of the best to ever do it. And so they can see when a guy's and also one of the most straight shooting guys in the world, maybe some people would say to a fault, but you had a guy that this is just, he's going to give it to you how it is. And so the players have seen greatness. They know what championship level coaching looks like. They know what championship level preparation looks like because they were around that this past year. So when you hear that those players who know what greatness looks like, that they listen to Joe Rudolph and they're like, yo, I'm on board with this. That tells me something. It's like, when you get into, the debates about who's the greatest at this, that, or the other thing, it's like, I'm going to listen to a guy that I know that went against that dude. It's like, Sean, we're seeing in the NBA right now, right? This knucklehead JJ Redick just running his mouth off disrespectfully about things, right? Like, I don't respect what he has to say because he didn't live it, right? Like, I'm going to have more respect for the people that lived both eras and say, hey, look, you can say whatever you want, and you have whatever you think, but here's what I know. Like, when you can say whatever you want about attempts and makes and percentages, but here's the deal. I'm going to count the number of guys on one hand that I'm giving the ball to with 10 seconds or less in the NBA, Game 7 of the NBA Finals to take a three. There's going to be, on one hand, the number of dudes I'd count that I would even consider having take that shot other than Larry Bird. It's like MJ, Steph, and that's probably the list. Start taking a three. And MJ wasn't a three-point shooter, but I don't care where MJ's shooting it from. You're giving him the ball in the last 10 seconds of the game. The point being is I'm listening to the people that saw it. They know what greatness looks like because they experienced it. I had to stop it. I know how good of a shooter he was because I had to guard him. You know what I mean? And so it's the same. And this is sort of thing with the Notre Dame offensive lineman. They experienced what being pushed at the elite level, being coached at the elite level looks like. So when they're bought in after sitting down talking ball with Joe Rudolph, then I'd be foolish not to say, okay, I'm bought in. Now I got to see it, right? But they've seen it. And so there has to be a level of buy-in, because I think at the end of the day, we've seen where there's not a ton of buy-in at some places. I don't think there's a lot of buy-in, or at least the level of buy-in you need when it came to the defensive line last year. And I also think that's true when it comes to the way the defense as a whole was coached with some of the conversation I've had. I think sometimes players are like, I don't think so, right? Like, I don't, because there's no track record there of success. And the way the season played out, it backed up that lack of track record of success. I don't think that's going to be the case on the offensive line, at least going into the spring. Now it's about up to Coach Rudolph and Coach Parker to say, okay, now let's earn that. Let's take that respect that we're being given, that trust we're being given, and now really take it to the next level and earn it. And I think that's where we're going to find out this spring, Sean. It's all sounds great now, all on board now, or it's rainbows and sunshine now, right? It's got to be that way coming out of spring right now. But I can say I'm confident in saying that right now, I feel a lot better about where the offense is right now. Not what it could have been, but what it is. A lot more confident right now about this football team offensively from a coaching player combination standpoint than I was a year ago. Because remember, there's no Chancey Stuckey on this year's coaching staff, meaning a guy that you're like, I have no clue if this guy can coach or not. Guy's been a coach for 1 year. I have no clue if he can coach or not. I have no idea. None. And there's not that. I didn't know much about Jared Parker a year ago. We at least know what's being brought in now. And there's a lot better track record of it. And so I think that's where I say I feel a lot better about where they are now than they were a year ago. And I don't know if I would have said that based on how this process started, to be completely honest with you, Sean.
No, I totally agree with you. Like across the board, I don't think there's any area where you can definitively say, no, Notre Dame is not set to be better than they were in 2022. Everything is really set up for the offense to take a step forward. And I think it would have been that way because most people say, yeah, well, that's because of Sam Hartman. No, if Tyler Buckner was the quarterback going into this season, I would think the offensive line and running backs, the wide receivers, every group we've talked about will be in position to be better in 2023 because I think Tyler Buckner will be in position to be better in 2023. And Sam Hartman coming over only enhances what was already in the works for 2023, in my opinion. So I think the offensive line is going to this is the thing. Everybody's going to make everybody better. I think the wide receivers are going to make Sam Hartman's job easier. I think Sam Hartman's going to make their job easier. I think he's going to impact the offensive line. I think the offensive line is definitely going to impact him. And I think they're going to impact the running backs. And I think the running backs, everybody's going to make life easier for everyone because everyone's going to take a step forward, or they're going to be in position to take advantage of the talent and the coaching combination that's there right now on the offense side of the ball. So everyone should be ecstatic. Fan base should be ecstatic. I know, and that's why I took a step back as you did. Talking to people and talked to some people that cover the Big Ten, and they were like, "Yo, he's a fantastic coach." Talking about Joe Rudolph, like, "Yo, he's a fantastic
Line coach.
Yes.
The only criticism I ever heard about him from people in the business were, I wouldn't hire him as my offensive coordinator.
Right.
But as a line coach, yes.
You're getting a
dude. You're getting a dude. Yeah. Now, my concerns are still there because those concerns were what I saw on film. But there's also a lot of good on film too, right? And so we'll have. I was going to have that breakdown a little bit sooner, but obviously, like I said, I got a little bit sick yesterday. I still plan on doing that. I have it about halfway done, so I'll have some of that stuff here coming up here next couple days. So, Sean, I don't know if I would. I hear where you're coming from. For me, I don't know if I would say that they should be ecstatic. What I would say is where I can only tell people to be where I am. I can't tell people to be somewhere that I'm not. Where I am, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I grow more optimistic by the day, the more I learn and talk and that kind of thing. I'm at the very least cautiously optimistic that this offense, not that it's going to be good. I expect
Mhm.
that. That's
Yeah.
expectation. It's that it can take that next step. I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, it's not a secret, Sean. A week ago, I would not have. If you'd have told me this would have been the hire a week ago, I'm like, oh, it's all
Of
right.
course.
But
Yeah.
it's because, like I said, we live in this era, Sean. It drives me nuts. Where if you're not on board with a guy and you don't think a guy's great, that means you think he sucks. And there's just like this, like narrow-brained people that just can't understand. Saying, no, I think he's a good coach. I just don't think it's good enough,
Yeah.
right? Well, no, you're a hater. Okay, whatever. You're an idiot. I don't have time to deal with that right now. Like, I never said Joe Rudolph was a bad coach.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know if he's a great fit. That was always my number one objection. Objection is they ran an offense completely different at Wisconsin than the one that you're going to run at Notre Dame, run game wise. Is that going to be a fit or not? And then the other one was there were some things I saw in film that at times concerned me in the bigger games. That's where I'm at. But I always said he was going to be a significant upgrade over the guy that you had before Harry Hiestand. They made 2 playoff appearances with that guy as the offensive line coach. 2.
Yeah.
So it's more about, is it good enough to be elite? That's the question, because that's the standard. And when you look at it, you say, you look at what it was before Marcus Freeman was hired. Offensive line, significant upgrade over what it was before Marcus Freeman was hired. Wide receivers coach. We hoped it would be an upgrade a year ago. We now know it is definitely an upgrade now. And forget the recruiting part. Just as a coach, significant upgrade.
Yes.
And then when you look at the recruiting aspect of it, also significant upgrade. Running back room, upgrade, which is saying a lot because I actually thought Lance Taylor did a pretty good job. And I think Dylan's come in and done an even better job.
Mm-hmm.
I thought John McNulty did a good job as the tight ends coach. Jared did just as good, if not better, in my view. Because I think at times Coach McNulty was still in that OC mind where Jared Parker embraced, I'm just the tight ends coach. And so I think that's an upgrade over where it's been. And then coordinator, I mean, that's the debatable one, right? Like that's the one where some people are going to have an opinion one way or the other. But I would say the combination of Jared Parker and Gino Guidugli is better than just Tommy Rees when you look at the quarterback coordinator situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I would be. And I certainly feel better about Jared Parker now than I did when Tommy Rees was hired, because he's a much more experienced, established coach, where Tommy Rees was a 27-year-old that was still like 2 years into his coaching career. And so to me, if you look at it now compared to where it was when Marcus Freeman was hired, it's hard for me to, take a step back. Again, you have to be able to remove the process from the end result. Yeah. If we wanted to have a show on the process, this show would take a much different tone, because the process sucked in a lot of ways. But take a step back from the process and look at the end result, right? What was the end result? Like, Sean, if I came over to your house and said, Sean, I'm going to bake you a cake, right? And I come in and you go out and you come back in hours later and the kitchen is spotless. I've cleaned it and all that kind of stuff. Like, wow, this process was pretty good. Now let me evaluate the taste of the cake.
Right.
The other part could be you'd walk into your kitchen, you're like, Brian, what in the world happened in here? There's flour everywhere. That's a disaster. I got dishes piled up into my sink. Like, what did you, well, I baked you a cake, right? So the process is going to determine your feelings at that point in time. But once you taste the cake, Sean, it's like, it's either good or it's not good. It doesn't matter what the process was like, right? And that's kind of where I'm at. And you're wanting me to bake you a cake now, right? I can just see it. Like you're thinking about like, this cake can I get?
No, I would love to see
my wife's the baker. My wife's what I would do is I'd come over, you'd leave, I'd sneak Angela in the back door, have her bake it for you because she's the baker. The only thing I bake is just fresh. I make homemade bread. She's the baker. She's the cupcake cake person. So that's how it would go. But the thing is we have to be able to remove ourselves from the issues with the process, which was flawed. and just completely screwed up by the way Jack Swarbrick handled things, right?
Yeah.
Remove yourself from that process and look at the end result.
Yeah.
And the end result is exactly what I wrote Marcus Freeman needed to do after that fiasco happened. He promoted Jared Parker to OC, which is what we asked him to do. He brought in Gino Guidugli as a quarterback's coach, which is what we asked him to do. And I'm saying he did it because we asked him to. Y'all understand that, right?
Yeah.
It was more about hire people you trust. These are the obvious candidates there. And then hire someone to coach your offensive line that you know that you believe in, that will buy into your vision. And that's exactly what he did. So take the process out, Sean.
Yeah.
Look at the end result. And the end result is this has a chance to be a pretty darn good offensive staff. It's got a lot to prove.
Yeah.
Got a lot to prove. But it has a chance to be a pretty darn good staff.
It reminds me of when I was a kid and I was getting ready to go into Little League, right? I was going up from what they call minor league up to Little League. And I told my dad, I was like, yo, I need some new cleats. My feet grew. I was like, I want these Nike cleats. Gave it to him, told him where he could get it. He was like, okay, cool. And I'm waiting for him to show up with the cleats before my first game. And he shows up and he has a nice box. And I open it up and there's some Pro Wings from Payless. And I'm like, yo, like what's this? He's like, son, go play baseball. And I'm mad and I'm angry. And I go 3 for 3. Right. And I end up having a great season. We end up going to the All-Star game, playing for state. And long story short, my dad was like, you played pretty good in those Pro Wings, huh? And I was like, yeah. He was like, yeah, I learned my lesson, and then I asked my grandmother at the start of the next season for the Nikes and ended up getting them. Like, I know, I learned 2 lessons. Never ask you for the expensive stuff. And yes, it doesn't make a difference what I look like. Can I get the job done?
Yeah.
And this is Notre Dame fans ultimately doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, emotionally, it may matter what the coaching staff looks like. If they can get the job done, no one cares at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We'll look back at this whole process and how disappointing it might have been and everything that came from it. And we'll say, wow, Notre Dame went to the college football playoffs. Hartman was great. Tyler was great. They put up almost 40 points a game.
O-line was still good.
O-line was good. We sent 2 O-linemen to the first round in the NFL draft. Like, all of this is possible. Even with everything that happened, all of these things are possible a year from now. And so, it's up to them. And like you said, I think this is a team that has that bunker mentality. I'm ecstatic. My point is, I don't care what the coaching staff looks like. Just strictly from a player standpoint, I'm ecstatic about the offense. Just talent. Talent.
So you're excited to see what it can be. I get you.
Absolutely.
I'm with you. That makes sense.
Now
that and from that clarification, Sean, 100% same page.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you and I talked about. I don't know if we said it on the show or not, but you and I have talked about this. Like, I'm looking forward to this process being over, so we can get back to focusing on the players, which is the exciting part.
Yes,
that's what has us so optimistic. That's why these coaching hires matter.
Yeah,
because it's like, dude, you got some players. You're in position to do something.
Yeah,
don't screw it up.
Yeah,
right. And I think that I've said before, if you have faith in Coach Freeman, then you look at these hires and say he knows these guys better than personally more than you and I do. Now that doesn't mean that he's always right, because Brian Kelly knew Brian Van Gorder a lot more than I did. Right. He knew Paul Longo a lot more than I did. He knew Brian Poley and Jeff Quinn a lot more than I did, and they were bad hires. So, but the point is, the talent is there. That's the exciting part. Where I'm cautiously optimistic is we have seen talented teams get wasted in Notre Dame before. I watched Jalen Smith getting wasted for, really 2 years.
2 years.
I don't think Diaco wasted him his freshman year. I mean, he used him well, put him at that he wasn't the dog. He was
a will, right?
No, he played basically like the Diaco's version of a rover, basically.
Okay.
He played the spot that Danny Spahn played in 2012, essentially. I can't remember if it was the dog. Remember the dog and the cat, I think is what they were called. He played the field one that Danny Spahn played. And Kerry Neal played in 2010 and 2011. But that was fine as a freshman.
Yeah.
But then the next 2 years, I had to watch a very talented player get wasted. And that's what kind of gives me pause when I go into this hiring process, because you're like, we've been here before.
Yeah.
Where you're like, boy, they got a really talented team, but I think that the coach going to do something to screw it up? And that's what was so frustrating, like 2015, for
About that
example. You're
team.
like, man,
Yeah.
why did they not make the move to bring in a different DC? And so that's where my cautious optimism comes from. Is so agree with you on the ecstatic of the talent. My cautious optimism has to do with I'm feeling a lot better, Sean. And you've seen the evolution in our private conversations of why I'm feeling better. But I'm feeling a lot better about, okay, I get why Coach Freeman went this direction. I believe in him.
Mm-hmm.
He believes in these hires. I've heard the reasons why. I'm on board.
Right.
Now, I'll evaluate them on the job that they do, but I'm a lot more optimistic. My tone and my feelings are a lot more optimistic about that. There is a staff in place as a collective,
Right.
to get these guys headed in the right direction and take that big jump. And that's where I'm excited about it. I am. I cautiously, I should say, I'm excited about the talent, cautiously optimistic that this coaching staff is going to be able to get the most out of that talent. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. Sean, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We got a mailbag coming up next, and we finally started getting some questions in here. But we're going to go to the mailbag next. But before we do, folks, I put up the wrong thing here. It's supposed to be that right there. But do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, folks. Hit that notification bell. Share this podcast. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to our Irish Breakdown podcast on all platforms that you can find, Apple, Spotify, all of it. And also sign up for our CFB Nation platform, because on the CFB Nation platform, you can get access to all of Lucky Lefty's podcasts. And so the one thing that Sean does, he does what we do with our podcasts, where, if you do like an hour, 2 hour long show with Malik, you'll break it down into different segments. So it's a little bit shorter, you can consume a little bit more at a time, come back later for part 2, things like that.
Yep.
So you can definitely get that on there. And of course, also please sign up for our CFB Nation YouTube page. I'm working on some deals, trying to get some more stuff added to that here moving forward. And I'm excited about some potential things that are happening, but we'll see if they do or they don't. But you'll definitely want to subscribe to that as well. And as always, Sean, sign up for the message boards at boardsirishbreakdown.com and check out our website at www.irishbreakdown.com. It's mailbag time, Mr. Davis, and we're gonna start up here. I got a super sticker from Driscoll's Intel Poker Face. I absolutely love this guy's name. He did reach out to me, because remember, I was like, I don't care if this is an insult or a compliment. It's funny either way.
Yeah.
He reached out and said it was meant as a positive, so I appreciate that. But I love this name. Normally, I don't like when my name's invoked in some people's names and stuff like that, but this one is pretty awesome. So I appreciate that. We appreciate the super sticker to get us kicked off with. Let's get out here, Sean, about this one. Timeout Tom, and we addressed it a little bit. I'll let you kind of answer it now, Sean. But we answered it on Tuesday night in the rapid fire, but we'll address it again now too, because not everybody could listen to that. But Timeout Tom asks, it seems that Notre Dame's offensive line room is loaded. So what was the thinking behind bringing in a transfer? Just for clarification, they didn't bring in a transfer. They were exploring potential options. It's always good to have, hey, look, let's at least look into it. I think the prospect jumped the gun a little bit on where things stood. But yes, as far as why would Notre Dame consider bringing in a transfer offensive lineman?
They shouldn't, unless it's an all-world guard that decides to transfer after the spring for whatever reason. Right? Let's say an offensive line coach gets a job in the NFL in the next week or so, and someone becomes available and they're an all-American, first-team all-American type, then, of course, you don't say no to that. You explore the option. But other than that, you have Kristofic that's played. He played a lot next to Joe Alt the freshman year. He's experienced. And then you have the talented Billy Schroff, and you have some other talented players behind that have been developed and they're ready to go. So just believe in your youth movement and your recruiting and continue to develop like Notre Dame does along the offensive line.
For me, Sean, I think you should always look to get better. Always. And I love the young talent. There's no doubt. But that doesn't mean that there might not be somebody better out there. Because again, what's the whole point of this? Notre Dame thinks they have a team in position to compete for a championship the next year or two.
Yeah.
You'd be silly to not bring in a guy that you think gets you closer to that mark than what you have right now. And you can say, hey, look, I think Billy Stroud's going to be a first-round NFL draft pick, but not in 2023.
Right.
That's going to be in 2025. Or I think Ty Chan could be this, or I think Rocco Spindler could be this, or I think Andrew Christopher could be this, but this guy over here could be this. And so I think they're willing to explore that. I think Notre Dame did a great job. If y'all knew as much as we did about the number of players that they had some sort of interaction with, you'd be like, man, these guys were out there working the transfer portal. Some of them weren't good fits. Some of them they couldn't get into school. Some of them they liked, but they're just like, he's not enough of an upgrade for us to rock that room, to kind of to rock the boat, so to speak, in that room. And I think that's kind of where you are when the offensive line is. What do you risk? Rocking the confidence of the young players that, hey, they don't believe in me, so they're bringing in a transfer. Because part of it is you want competition, Sean, right? Like that's a great thing in football. But sometimes a move made to bring competition, especially when you're talking about younger players, can be seen as a you don't have faith in me thing, right? And I always bring up the scene from Miracle, where they brought in that other kid, but like those were veterans. Those were guys that were finishing up their college careers, getting ready to go play in the NHL. These were not freshman hockey players. These were veterans of that age level. They were at the top level of that amateur level, seniors, juniors, older guys. So you could play that mind game with them, and they were going to handle it better maybe than an 18, 19-year-old who hasn't established himself as one of the best. And those hockey players had already established themselves as the best of the best.
Yes, yeah.
And so there was a level of confidence there that may not be there if you're talking about younger players.
Right.
So, yes, I want competition, but at the expense of maybe shaking the confidence of my younger guys, it's not worth it. Because the talent that that kid from Maryland had was not what the younger kids at Notre Dame has. He just has more experience and size. That's it. And so I understand why they would look in that direction. But I also understand and am on board with them deciding not to go there. And so that's where I am on that one, Sean, is I think they should explore. I think Tyler Buckner could be a great quarterback. I still think they were correct in bringing in Sam Hartman.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think Sam Hartman is in 2023 has a chance to be the best quarterback that they've had in a long time. I also think that if Tyler Buckner stays, that by 2024-25, he could be the best quarterback they've had in a long time.
Yep.
Doesn't mean he's going to be that guy in 23. And these moves are meant to, what can we do to be the best football team that we can be in 2023?
Yeah.
And if that means you're bringing a guard, you're bringing a guard. If that means you're bringing a center, you're bringing a center. If that means you're bringing a running back, you're bringing a running back. Like, if I love Notre Dame's backfield, but if Bijan Robinson said, no, I'm not going to the NFL. Matter of fact, I'm also going to go in the transfer portal and go to Notre Dame. I'm going to be like, sorry, dude. We're good here. No. Yeah. Come on. And that's just kind of, that's what you got to do. But Lunsford was not that type of player, in my opinion. So I think they made the right decision. Here's a draft question for you, Sean. Our resident draft expert is currently in Indianapolis right now watching players work out. So that would be Brian Roberts. But I'm going to ask you this as well. This is from Antoine Porcher-Rideau. He says, off subject, but what does Foskey have to do today at the Combine? So just so you know, it's going on right now. The Combine is going – the first day of the workouts is going on right now. Defensive linemen are going through their drills. I'm watching Moro Ojamo going through workout drills right now on my other screen, the D-line from Texas. And so Foskey will be working out today. That's where the question's coming from. So Antoine says, off subject, but what does Foskey have to do today at the Combine, which starts soon, which is going on now? Antoine's question was before it started. To prove he should be considered the second or third best D-end in the draft.
Second or third. He definitely can't get the second. Not the way Tyree Wilson is moving up.
Do you know Wilson and Anderson are 1 and 2?
And Anderson are 1 and 2, yeah. This just the film and dealing with size, right? Yesterday was very interesting. They asked him yesterday, how he sets up his pass rush, and he said, "I test guys out early with the bull rush," and I'm like, shouldn't your strategy be based upon what type of tackle you're facing? Like when you're facing DeJuan Jones, big guys like that. I don't know how successful you're going to be with the bull rush, but it was interesting to see him saying that. I think when he gets to the pros, some coach might recalibrate his mindset, when it comes to pass rushing. But he's going to test well. Like he's just one of those athletes that looks fantastic up close and personal, right? Long arms, 6'5", 260. He's going to run well. He's going to test well. So, I think he's going to do everything he needs to do. It's just a matter of whether or not people elevate his testing over what his film was overall.
What I would say, Sean, is Isaiah Foskey is a very unique draft prospect in that he has two things that you want, and that's elite size and production. We're talking about how we didn't think he had a great year this year. He had 14 tackles for loss and 11 sacks. Now, I'm not disagreeing with your point. We've talked about this. You and I are on the same page in regard to that. The film was not great, but he still went out there and had 14 tackles for loss and 11 sacks at Notre Dame. And so to me, if he runs at a freakish level for his size, that's something that could boost him way up, because then you look at it and say all the things keeping him from being great are at times motor, but more importantly, he has no plan. There's no like clear strategy of this is what he's doing. There was more of that in 2021 than there was this year. And so to me, if he runs like, let's say he runs like a 4.52, right? Just something crazy, great broad jump, 10-yard split is great, has good movement drills and all. I mean, just blows it away.
Yeah.
I could see him making a huge jump, because there's going to be defensive coordinators and defensive line coaches like, look, please give me this kid. Yeah. He's a great kid. He's a hard worker. He's going to have the right attitude. He's got elite physical tools. He just hasn't been taught how to use them yet. Like, I'll take a chance on a guy like that in the middle of the first round, late first round, over a guy that's toolsy but doesn't have the production. And that to me is the thing. Like, with like Alex Leatherwood, he wasn't even that toolsy in my opinion, other than he was just big and strong.
Right.
And the film was bad.
But like, he was at Alabama.
Right.
He was an Alabama lineman.
He had certain things that, people could look at. But like, to me, there's a lot to like about Isaiah Foskey.
Yeah.
And the only reason he's falling is because of the film wasn't great. But if he tested a way that just like, you can't ignore that. But he goes out there and runs a 4.6 something, that's really good for a guy his size.
Yeah.
But it's not I'm overlooking the film because of it type of thing. He'd have to me, get into the 4.5s to have that kind of impact, in my opinion. Yeah. That's where I'm at for that.
I just thought it was strange that, and if you go watch the film, it's why he struggled the first 2 weeks against big tackles with long arms.
Yeah.
He had the mindset, I'm going to test him out with bull rush. You can't bull rush big tackles like that. Like, use your speed and counter off your speed, and then pick and choose when you can bull rush in certain situations. Right. It's like, no, it's just like the way he approached it is kind of just different, because he didn't go to his strength. Your strength is your speed and your athleticism. Like, that's what you use, especially against really big tackles with long arms. It was just strange to hear him say that.
Yeah, it really was. Let's go to the next one here from Broke Neck Boy. Watching the USC and Miami game from 1988. Now, both of those games will put you in a good mood. The question, I'm sorry, that was me monologuing. The question is this, Sean, from Broke Neck Boy. Watching the USC and Miami game from 1988, the amount of points they scored was good, but the amount of turnovers they caused between those two games is crazy. Now, I will say this, Sean, about the points. The one thing to consider is that points were different back then than they are now. And Notre Dame averaged 32.8 points per game in 1988, for example. And 32.8 points per game in today's era would have ranked them 32nd in the country with Duke. Back then, however, it ranked 14th. And so that was actually they were a pretty explosive offense for their time. And so, and especially when you consider how much they controlled the clock, that even adds more to the points they scored. So I would say that scoring that many points was back then like the Miami Notre Dame was a high scoring game back then. Nowadays you look at it, you're like 34-33 or whatever it was. Like, okay, like whatever. It's a good game, but 31-30. But no, that was a man, I can't believe Notre Dame gave up 30 points. It's a lot of points for this defense.
Yeah.
So but yeah, they forced a ton of turnovers. And the thing about the Miami game too, Sean, is what was Steve Walsh's like stretch of like not turning the ball over?
Yeah.
He was going on some insane stretch of not turning
without
the ball
an interception.
And they hadn't sacked him in a long time. Like he hadn't been. I don't think he'd been sacked all year at that point in time. And when you consider who Miami had played up to that point in time, Sean, that meant a lot. They had already played Michigan at that point in time. I believe they had already played. Let me look up their schedule. I believe they had already played Florida State. Yeah, they played Florida State, Michigan already by that point in time in the season.
Because back then, I think they opened up with Florida State.
Opener. Beat them 31-0. Florida State was the number one ranked team in the country coming into that game. Michigan coming into the season was ranked. Let me see here. Michigan was ranked in the top 10. They were ranked 9th. They fell out of the top 10 because they lost to Notre Dame in the opener. 19-17. And then the next week, or if you watch the Catholics versus Convict documentary, you'll remember that Michigan was up big in that game on Miami.
Yeah.
And Miami came back and won it. And then the next 2 weeks they played Wisconsin and Missouri, who neither were very good. Wisconsin especially was really bad back then, but Missouri wasn't very good either back then. With do you know who Missouri's coach was back then, Sean? Here's one for you. Do you know who their coach was in 1988? You're gonna laugh when I give you this name. Woody Widenhofer. Remember the guy who ended up going to Vanderbilt after that?
Yeah.
He was Missouri's coach. They went 3-7-1 that year. So he ended up going to Vanderbilt. So 88 was his last year at Missouri, and he got hired again at Vanderbilt in 1997. But they weren't very good. But yeah, I mean, look, that to me is a big thing, Sean, and that's when we're going to talk about the defense very soon in one of our shows. Believe me, Sean and I have a lot to say about the defense. That might actually be a good RTCF show, Sean, because I know we both have a lot of feelings on that one.
Yeah,
and so we'll maybe do that on this Saturday. Talk about the defense a little bit, the turnovers are so important, and that's always been true. You got to be able to limit them on offense and force them on defense.
Yeah,
and you look. The Clemson offense against Alabama in the 2018 game was really good, but don't think that turnover, that pick six at the beginning, wasn't the catalyst for what came next on offense.
Right.
It absolutely was. When you can force turnovers, especially in big games, what was the initial turning point of the game in 2018 Cotton Bowl? Because if you look at the first two series, Notre Dame established a tone early. Their first drive, they were running on Clemson. They got a first down. If it wasn't for Chase Claypool just dropping a wide open third down, Notre Dame is moving on that first drive. There was a run play, I think it was the first drive, where the Notre Dame offensive line literally just Dexter Williams ran into the back of the line and they just went like 6-7 yards forward. They were moving Clemson. That game changed when? I believe it was the second series of the game. I believe it's second down. Ian Book climbs the pocket, gets stripped, doesn't throw it to Miles Boykin open on a post route, gets stripped. Because now, let me backtrack. Notre Dame punts, pins Clemson deep, and the defensive line just like for that first series, they overwhelmed Clemson. Like Trevor's like scrambling and throwing the ball away. Punt, Notre Dame gets the ball near midfield. Ian Book, I mean, you've got momentum. Like you haven't put points on board, you got momentum. Ian misses a chance to hit Miles Boykin and instead holds onto the ball too long, climbs into the pocket late, gets stripped. Clemson recovers and goes and gets a field goal. That completely changed the momentum of that game.
Yeah.
If on that play he hits Miles Boykin on that post instead of the turnover, we're talking about a different game here, right? And so those things are huge in big games. And so to me, that's where I look at it and I say, like LSU Georgia this year. LSU came out moving the ball pretty good against Georgia early. They kicked that field goal, gets blocked. Like LSU was looking pretty good out the gate. Get that field goal blocked, and then you return it for a touchdown. Like that's a turnover. Those are big things in big games. And getting that Frank Stamms on that early sack on Steve Walsh that forced the fumble was a tone setter for that game. Big time tone setter. Like, hey, I don't care who you are. Okay, how many games it's been since you haven't turned the ball over or been sacked or whatever, you haven't played us. And absolutely, man. And then, of course, the turnovers in the USC game were big too. But I think Notre Dame had already started to overwhelm USC before the big turnovers. And I don't know how many turnovers they forced. I remember the Smagala had to pick 6, obviously. That was a big one. And I know they forced a couple. But, man, they had Rodney Peete scrambling
running for his life.
From jump.
Knocked him out of the game for a little bit. Yeah.
The tone of that game was different than the Miami game. USC was clearly the undermatched team from the get-go. The Miami game was more even, and it was the turnover. I mean, because the thing is like they both turned for. If Miami doesn't force a couple turnovers of Notre Dame's got a much bigger lead in that game too.
Yeah.
And so both of those teams did a good job of forcing much needed turnovers, where USC was just not on the same. I mean, I know they were ranked number 2 and all that, but there was a big difference between USC and Miami that year.
Big difference.
There was.
Big difference.
There was.
Because the strength of USC was really their youngsters that were on the sideline. Because like the next year, they come with Marinovich in '89, and they pretty much held the lead. That's at Notre Dame Stadium for the majority of that game.
Notre Dame turned the ball. Well, that's another game too. You talk about the impact of turnovers, Sean. Notre Dame had like 5 turnovers that game.
That's when their defense became the Willie McGinnis. That young class was the defensive class at USC that was starting to get on the field. So their defense took a step up and kind of matched Notre Dame's. And like you said, Notre Dame was just sloppy offensively that day until the fourth quarter when Tony Rice just took it over.
Do you know the issue for me back then with USC, why Notre Dame dominated USC the way that they did under Lou Holtz? Is it comes down to if people that don't understand, like, was USC just bad? Some years they weren't very good, but there were some years where USC was pretty good and Notre Dame dominated them. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame was kryptonite for USC because USC was a fast West Coast offense.
Yeah.
And Notre Dame was kryptonite for them for 2 reasons. One, they were just so much more physical than USC. And number 2, USC wasn't faster than Notre Dame.
Yep.
They were faster than everybody else. They didn't have better athletes than Notre Dame. And this is the thing that is the constant from younger folks who didn't watch, like older folks like us, Sean, we know how athletic that team was. But younger folks I don't think they appreciate just how explosive athletically that Notre Dame team was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Man. I mean, they could run with anybody. I mean, that's why they won 2 or 3 out of Miami. I've said this before. In a 5-year stretch, I think Miami won 3 national titles in 5 years. The 2 years they didn't, they lost to Notre Dame.
Yep.
Right? And they only played each other 3 times during that stretch. They didn't play them in 91 and 92. And so to me, or no, they won 4 titles and 2 titles in 4 years, excuse me. But it was Notre Dame was their kryptonite. It wasn't Florida State and all their athletes. It was Notre Dame because Notre Dame could punch them in the mouth and still run with them.
Right.
And that's what the 93 thing certain ways. The reason Florida State couldn't beat Notre Dame offensively the way that other teams did is because Notre Dame had legit NFL athletes in their secondary and up front. So they could beat you up physically, but then they could still run on defense. Now, that team wasn't as athletic as the 88, 89, 90 teams, but it still could be that way. But those 88, 89, 90 teams, Sean, were when Ricky Waters is like not in your top 2 from a dynamic athlete standpoint on your offense, you're pretty flipping dynamic, right? Yeah. And that's why USC was no match. The thing that a lot of people don't give Miami enough credit, especially the Jimmy Johnson version of Miami, is they were physical. They weren't just fast.
Yeah.
They were physical. They had legit NFL guys in the offensive line. They had legit, they had like 2 years in a row, or two kind of units in a row where they had, Russell Maryland, you had Cortez Kennedy, you had Jerome Brown. They had legit NFL guys. So Notre Dame wasn't the same kryptonite to Miami that they were to USC, where they just dominated. Notre Dame could turn the ball over 5 times against USC in '89 and still beat them.
Yeah.
Because they just, they couldn't handle that. Miami was a little bit different. Miami was the team that would bully people in the trenches defensively, and then their offense was high octane and explosive, and that's what made them so good. They couldn't do that to Notre Dame because Notre Dame had Pat Terrell. Stan Smagala wasn't an NFL guy, but Stan Smagala could fly. He was really fast.
Yeah.
They were really athletic on defense. Michael Stonebreaker was one of the most athletic linebackers in the country back then. it's hard to tell that because I just always felt like the pads made them look less athletic than they were, to be honest with you. The big lumbering pads and all that kind of stuff. But offensively, like, I mean, you had Ricky Waters and Rocket Ismail and Tony Rice. I mean, you're not going to find a more dynamic trio of athletes on anyone's offense back then than that trio. And against USC, they even sent Tony Brooks and Ricky Waters home. You know?
Absolutely.
So that's what made them so special. And that's where Notre Dame's got to get back to is, yeah, it's good to be able to beat people in the trenches. But what makes me excited about this team is not that they just that, but it's like, I think they have legit skill. I mean, I think they have a cornerback tandem as good as anybody in the country. I really do believe that. We'll see if I'm right or not. I think their receiving core is far more dynamic and athletic than people realize. It is. And they have guys on offense that are home run hitters that they just didn't utilize last year, partly because of injury, partly because they didn't use certain guys. That's what gets me excited, Sean. And that's why this coaching stuff needs to be correct, because I'm really bullish on this Notre Dame, on the skill on this Notre Dame football team. They just needed the right trigger man. And last year they didn't really have it because Tyler went down and he wasn't that good in the first couple games. He was better than people thought, I thought, against Ohio State. The offensive line is what let the offense down in that game. Not Tyler Buckner. But this year it's just a different animal, and it has me pretty fired up. But yeah, I was actually, you know what I was doing the other night, Sean, is I was actually watching 93 games. Because I'd watched a lot of 88 this offseason, but I hadn't watched a lot of 93. So I was watching the Michigan State game and the USC games from 93. And then I watched the onward thing that Notre Dame does, the 20-minute video they have of breaking that game down. You know, the production Notre Dame just had me fired up. You just think of all the hype going into that game. And it was like if Clemson and Alabama prior to 2021 would have played in the regular season, it was that.
It was that.
Like if Notre Dame and Bama would have played, if Clemson and Bama would have played in the regular season in 2019, after they had just both won multiple titles and, you know, just were dominant, like it was that kind of game. 1 versus 2. I mean, just it was that kind of hype. And I'll never forget that, man. I'll never forget that. But that was a fun season. Kevin McDougal, that really long, awkward throwing motion, but he could get it where it needed to go, man.
Where it needed to be.
Yeah. Here's a super chat from Cuba Puig. Thank you very much, my friend. Whose Heisman Trophy run was more impressive? Joe Burrow and the talented LSU team or Cam Newton's Auburn team? I think I'm more impressed with Cam's teams. Well, I think you're kind of asking two different questions, though. Which Heisman run was more impressive, or which guy putting a team on his shoulder was more impressive? From whose championship run was more impressive? Cam's, because Cam had to carry that team a lot more than Joe did, and so that's part of it. And number two, there was, I mean, well, yeah, that's really it. I mean, his run was more impressive. They were more dependent on him to be like, if you take Cam off that Auburn team, they're 8-4,
they're middle of the pack. Yeah.
If you take Joe Burrow off that LSU team, they're still 10-2. They're just not elite the way that they were. And so to me, the championship run that Cam went on was more impressive to me. The Heisman run for Joe Burrow was more impressive, though, for me, just because he was just – that was such a more fun offense to watch. And the other thing, too, is, you know, Cam didn't exactly always light the world on fire in 2010. There were a lot of games in 2010, Sean, if you remember, where, you know, Cam didn't actually play that well. He would then step up late and make some plays.
Yeah.
Like, he played kind of crappy against Clemson, to be honest with you, in that game that year. But he made plays, and he went 7 of 14 through 2 picks. But he made the money plays to win, and it wasn't a great Clemson team, right? It was a Clemson team that went 6-7. So he didn't really play that well that year. He had some other games where he was better, and some games where he was a freak. You know, like the second half against Alabama was just like, I mean, that was just, it was unreal. I mean, it wasn't what Vince did, but just some of the plays he made in that game. They were down, 21-0 in that game, something like that at halftime, right before halftime. But Joe Burrow was just an unreal trigger man for that offense. I mean, just unreal.
Yeah.
And so Heisman run, Joe Burrow. Championship run, Cam. Is that fair, Sean?
Makes sense. Yeah, what Cam did for that university and for that program was absolutely amazing, amazing. But people that were with him at Florida saw that
Right.
on a daily basis. Like he was an immature kid at that point in time, and he was behind Tim Tebow. I mean,
At that point in time, I think
yeah,
that's kind of been his big issue throughout
yeah,
his career. But yeah, he was behind a freak as well, another
yeah,
freak at
yeah,
quarterback.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Very good question. Let's get to some more here. We've got one from D-Rock Irish. Any thoughts on the proposed rule changes to speed up the game? I shared my thoughts on this the other day, Sean. I'll allow you to share yours. So it's basically clock runs after first downs, clock runs after incompletions once the ball spotted, can't call consecutive timeouts. And what was the fourth one? Trying to remember what the fourth one was.
I
Don't
don't look. I don't understand this whole time thing. I don't know who they're talking to. I'm fine with my Saturday being consumed with college football.
no.
I don't care how long the game is. I don't. Matter of fact, I need the Notre Dame game to end, the 3 o'clock game to end. And as soon as it ends, I turn over and the 6 o'clock game is ready to go. I
Mhm.
don't need any time in between. So, look, that's what makes college football great, especially at the end of games, that you know from a strategic standpoint, first down means the clock is stopped. First down, clock is stopped. We can save our timeouts.
Right.
That's strategy. You're trying to make it too much like the NFL.
Right.
It's college football. Let it have its own energy, its own DNA. Just relax. The last two you talked about,
The fourth one was I did look it up, Sean. It's not having untimed downs at the end of a quarter. Just carry that to the next
untimed
quarter, which
downs, and
that one
then the
I'm
other
fine,
one
totally
said
fine with.
back-to-back timeouts, right?
Which I'm
I
also
can
a
rock with
supporter of.
those. Yeah, I can rock
Definitely.
with those. I can rock with
Definitely.
those.
The so the one you talked about, the first down one, and to me, incomplete passes, stopping the clock. And what I would say is don't start the clock again. Just have the clock. How about less shortening the clock? Right. Make the play clocks shorter if you want to do something like that. To
Absolutely.
me.
But then if you don't stop the clock with incompletions, how can you come up to the line of scrimmage and want to stop the clock without running the play with just throwing it in the ground? Like
Right.
how did
You
how
can't
you
spike the ball and
differentiate?
then
Right.
right. Here's the other thing too, Sean, that I have an issue. Here's my big overall issue. They're saying it's about player safety. Bullcrap.
Oh,
And and the justification is, well, some teams have to play 17 games now. Then why are you having them play 17 freaking games? Right? So like what you're doing is you're making moves that you think are going to make you money. And so now you're like, oh, gee, we've got to make these rules to protect the players. You're the one that created the rules that are not quote unquote now putting in players in a position where they're not being protected. Number one. Number two, if you really cared about shortening games because you're worried about how long
oh
they take,
boy.
how about you have less? Like halftime in college football is 20 freaking minutes. It's not that way at Division III level. This is what I've said. Division III and Division I basically play by the same rules. Division III games don't last 3.5 hours. Why?
No.
It's because of freaking TV timeouts. That's
Yes.
why. You'll be at games and you're like, everyone's at the line of scrimmage and we're all just
Ready to
standing
go.
around because we're waiting on the dude with the
Waiting on
orange
the
thing to
orange thing.
tell him to go
Yes.
because we're back from the TV timeout.
Thank you.
So don't tell me it's about player safety. That's number two. Number three is once again, you have a rule that's hurting the masses.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the issue. It can never be more than two teams that will play 17 games. Never, it's not possible for more than two teams to play 17 games, right? So spare me with the 17 game stuff. What you've now done too is because you're making less plays, 90% of college football players are not going to go to the National Football League. So what you've done now is you've taken more and more away from their last opportunities to play football at a professional level. And at the expense of player safety. Bullcrap. Stop lying to me. And if you are going to lie to me, come up with better lies. Oh, well, it's, guys can play 17
Player
games now.
safety.
Why do they have to play 17 games?
Right. Let's expand the playoffs with more games, but yet still we want the games to be faster.
Right. If you want the games to be like some of the rules, Sean, I'm with. Here's a thought: get rid of replay.
Yeah.
Get rid of replay. You're getting it wrong half the damn time anyway.
Or refine replay.
But Sean, like, why do we need replay? Do you know? I mean, we watch games; they get it wrong all the freaking time.
Now I do
all the time.
I do like the NFL where I forget what they call it, but basically they pretty much tell you like, yo, reverse that. They'll call down and it's like 30 seconds.
Then put a clock on it.
Right.
You can only, like, to me, what I would do is I'd only have reviews. I would only allow coaches to challenge reviews. That's it. And you get one challenge a half. I say you can say you get 2 challenges, whatever. I mean, you can make the rules on how many challenges you get, right? But to me, make it a coach challenge. And if you get it wrong, you lose your challenges for the rest of that half. If you give 2 per half, something like that, right? But to me, because they get replay wrong so often, I don't see the need for replay. What eliminates human error? No, it doesn't, because it's still humans making that decision in the box. There's still a subjective nature to it. For example, remember we've seen some of the BS targetings on Notre Dame players, and yet I got to watch a guy spear Deshaun Kaiser in the face for Virginia Tech. They review it and no targeting. I got to watch Torrey Hunter almost have his career ended with a head-to-head blow against Texas. They review it and got it wrong. I got to watch the replay completely blow a call on the sidelines with Armando Allen in 2009 to completely change the course of that game, and they got it completely wrong. They got the fumble by Chase Claypool in the 2018 Cotton Bowl. They got it completely wrong.
Heck, the forced fumble with DJ Bertrand against Stafford this year.
So they get it wrong all the freaking time. So why are we wasting time on it? Right? Review the call. Review the call. You know, I mean, go with the call. Stop reviewing these calls. That'll shorten the game. Yeah. Well, we need to make sure we get it right. But you're not.
Yeah.
You're not. And so to me, I would say get rid of that stuff. Right? I mean, get rid of that. So, because it's not about player safety. These commissioners, they act so, it's about, but no, if you cared about player safety, you wouldn't have conference championship games. You wouldn't be talking about expanding the playoffs. You'd be doing any of that stuff if you cared about player safety. If you really cared about players playing fewer plays, then go back to 11 regular season games. That was true for more of my life than 12 regular season games.
Yeah.
Get away from conference championship games then, if you really care about player safety. Why are you expanding the playoffs if you care about player safety and you want fewer plays? Why are you expanding the playoffs? Explain that to me. Well, bullcrap. It's money. Just be honest. This is what I was. Just be honest. Why are you guys trying to shorten games? Hey, look, our TV partners give us a lot of money, and they don't like the fact that there's a lot of carryover where games are ending beyond the start points for the next games. Be honest about it.
Who cares? Show of hands. Who cares?
I don't. But if you're watching a game and it's your team, you're going to keep watching your team. You don't care that it goes over. If you're watching a game that's not your team and your team starts at 7, like an LSU fan watching the Notre Dame 3:30 game isn't going to not switch over to LSU Alabama that starts at 7 because the Notre Dame game's not over. They're going to still watch the other game.
If Notre Dame is on the Disney Family Network, then they're supposed to be on Channel 7 at 6, or not 6, but 3. And the 12 o'clock game spills over, then guess what? Notre Dame's going to be on ESPN, ESPN2. They're going to be on one of the networks to start the game. Change the channel. And they'll be back to Channel 7 when that game is done. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, so what? It's not like the game is being halted in the other destination. Like, we're waiting for the first game to start. No, they start the game. They start the game.
And I mean, we're not all watching from old school TV show where your dad says, hey, go change a channel. You got to walk up there and click it over to one of your 5 channels, right? No, we all have DVR. We all have some streaming where it allows us to record things. Like, nobody these days is not recording all these games anyway, if you want to watch them.
Right.
And then I go to my YouTube TV, I click on it, and it says, go live or start from the beginning. Start from the beginning, fast forward through the commercials, and I'm caught up in 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So it's like, just be honest, for real. Just be honest.
And I understand certain people might not have cable options or whatever. It is what it is. It is what it is, right? Because
But
if you were the first game, you wouldn't want them to click away from Notre Dame at the end of the
right,
game to start the next game.
right.
So you can't have it both ways.
But how many
And
people is that
sometimes
though?
it works against you,
Right. There's
and it
just
is what
so
it
few
is.
people that don't have the ability to have a game recorded. There's so few people. There's very few people watching sports on just basic cable these days. But, it is what it is. So,
It
yeah,
is
that's
what it is,
somebody
man.
said changing the channel with vice grips. Yeah, yep, remember that? The button popped off, and you gotta get the pliers out and change the channel, man. We've been there.
I don't
We've
know
been
what
there.
else to tell you, man. I'm a patient person. I promise you. I love college football too much that if I'm watching a very highly competitive, dramatic game and I'm missing the first two
Mhm.
series of Notre Dame, I'll be okay.
Yeah. And the
I'll
game's
be
gonna be
okay.
played they're gonna have it on another channel, So but here's the thing, if you wanna shorten
Now,
games, just be honest about why.
if it's 44 to nothing and they're sticking around with that first
Sure.
game, then
But
it's
they
like,
don't normally
okay.
do that, though. They don't
No, they
normally do
don't.
that. They normally
They
go, "Hey,
don't.
we're gonna go to this game's over, we're gonna go to so and so game."
Exactly.
Right. So, I just wish they would be honest. That's what I'm tired of. I'm tired you just think we're really stupid that you're gonna say this, and I'm just I'm so tired of that, Sean. I'm just so tired of the, "Oh, we're doing it for player safety." No, you're not. If you cared about player safety, you would not be asking guys to play 17 games.
Nah.
You wouldn't be doing it. If you cared about player safety, you'd say, "Hey, we're gonna shorten the regular season." If that's really what you cared about, but you're not, it's about money. And now you're taking more and more opportunities to play away from kids who this is their last level of football.
Yep.
And they don't think about those. It's like they never think of the collateral damage that's done with these rules. They never thought about the collateral damage with the portal.
Yeah.
Never. They never thought of the collateral damage with just the open Wild West NIL. And what's the first team that gets hammered for NIL? Miami's women's basketball team. So it's just all such a fraud. And I just
Oh,
wish they'd be honest, because I think most of us would respect it. Hey, our TV partners give us a crap load of money. That's why you have access to almost every game that matters. Whereas back in the 80s, it was like you had one game here and one game there. And Notre Dame fans don't appreciate this because of how Notre Dame is always televised, whether they had the DVD deal or not. I mean, 88, almost every Notre Dame game was on TV because it was Notre Dame. Now they got their own deal. But you couldn't see a Pac-12 team
yeah.
back in the day. I mean, I get all that, right? So, hey, look, they're giving us a lot of money and they want games to be started earlier and they don't want as much carryover, blah, 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 blah. Like, I've never walked out of a stadium with fans saying, gee, that game took too long.
No.
Outside of the South Florida Notre Dame game in 2011, but that was a completely different animal. It's because
No.
you had like a 2-hour delay in between. Here's the first thing you do. High school halftime's what, 15 minutes? Division III halftime's 15 minutes.
Mhm.
NFL halftime's 12 minutes. College football halftime is 20 minutes. Bam, right there. 5 minutes gone. Take off 5 minutes from halftime.
Yeah.
Right there. Start games sooner. Stop having kickoff be at 7:06. Have it be at 7:02. I just saved you 9 minutes right there. Right? Put a clock on replays. If you don't have the answer, here's the thing. If you don't have the answer after a minute, you don't need to keep looking.
Right.
Right? You can't overrule a play that if it takes you over a minute, it's not irrefutable evidence, in my opinion. So put a minute on it, and if you don't have your answer, right there. And there's 3-4 replay challenges a game? Right there, Sean, we just saved 12, 13 minutes right there. That's all you need. That's all you need. You just saved it. And then maybe trim 30 seconds off of, certain commercials, whatever. I mean, there's so many things you could do if you really wanted to shorten games. So don't tell me it's about player safety,
Yeah.
because you guys don't care about player safety at all. So just stop with that. The only degree that I believe the NCAA cares about player safety is to make rules that then prevent that then take away liability concerns for them,
Yeah.
so they can't get sued. I think that's the only reason that they come up with the rules that they come up with, in my opinion. So that's my issue. And somebody just said it's not time, it's pace of play. No, it's about time. Pace of play in college football right now is very fast. It is. I mean, it goes at a faster pace than any other level of football, Sean, especially with teams that run that tempo stuff. Again, there's some rules I'm all about. I hate the 2 timeout rule. I hate it. I hate it in basketball. I hate it in football. You should call 1 timeout. Now, if the other team wants to call a timeout, they can call a timeout, but you're not going to have 3 timeouts, right? You're not going to have back-to-back ice in the kicker situations. I mean, I get all that. I get all that. But there's plenty of things they could do if they wanted to quicken up the pace of the game. I would. It's ridiculous. All right, let's see here. Let's get to this some more questions here, Sean. From DC Irish, what team will be harder to beat in 2023? Ohio State, USC, or Clemson?
Will be harder to beat?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Ohio State. They've beaten USC and Clemson. This is mental. This is all mental for this program. Ohio State. You have to get over the mental hurdle of beating Ohio State. Notre Dame knows they can beat USC. They know they can beat Clemson. They've done it. And people are like, well, man, I don't think Ohio State's going to have a quarterback. They lost this. They lost that. Okay. I can tell you they got some pretty good athletes at Ohio State. I don't care who they walk in here with. It's going to be a huge mental hurdle to get over to beat Ohio State.
I think it's Ohio State, and I don't think it's close. USC has the best player of all 3 of those teams in Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
They don't have the best roster. Ohio State still does.
Yeah.
And they're not as physical as Ohio State's going to be next year, in my opinion. And so it's still Ohio State. And I think then you add in the fact of what you're talking about, Sean, which is it's the mental block that every kid on this team that beyond the class of 2022, meaning the true freshman last year, has been on a team that's beat Clemson and USC. Everyone. What they haven't been on is a team that's beaten Ohio State. Matter of fact, there's not a player under the age of 70?
Yes.
Beat Ohio State.
Beat Ohio State. Yeah.
So and that might even be pushing it because they just haven't played a ton and the teams they've had have lost. So I think Ohio State's not only the best team in there, and I think where people are going to say is, well, it's USC. Look at the quarterback. Look, first of all, folks, Ohio State's going to be just fine at quarterback this year. I mean, just fine.
Why do people didn't they just go through this with CJ Stroud?
Right.
When he was a freshman or
zero career passes the year before. Right. Yes. They're going to be fine.
At least give Ryan Day that much credit that he knows how to develop quarterbacks.
Right. They had a smooth transition from Dwayne Haskins to Justin Fields. They had a smooth transition from Justin Fields to CJ Stroud. And they'll have a smooth transition from CJ Stroud to whether it be Kyle McCord or Devin Brown. They're going to be fine there. Plus, they're thrown to the best receiving core in the country, in my opinion. Without question, the best 1-2 punch. We can maybe argue maybe there's some teams with deeper here, deeper there. I don't agree with that. I think Ohio State's the best receiving core in the country.
Heck, and they got one of the best receiving classes.
That's right. That was my point. Like, if you say, well, depth-wise, maybe this team or that team's better, but I'm like, but they are pretty deep as well. It's not just those 2 guys and then a bunch of, it's not like you've got Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, and then like Chris Fink, and then not a lot after that, right? This is a different deal. They've got dudes, but if those dudes weren't there, other dudes would step up and be dudes. I mean, that's just where they are at receiver right now. So, and if their running backs are healthy this year, they're pretty loaded at running back as well. So they just got to keep those guys healthy. So it's Ohio State for me, and I don't think it's close. Now, I'm not saying that Ohio State is definitely going to be ranked higher than USC or Clemson at the end of the year. That remains to be seen. But for the matchup against Notre Dame, it's still the harder game for me.
Yeah, I think someone in the chat said, Michigan exposed Ohio State. Yes, they did. Michigan proved they can beat Ohio State. Yes. Notre Dame hasn't.
Correct. Because the question is who's harder for – and I would argue this, Sean.
And they didn't expose them this year. They exposed them last year and built on the fact that they exposed them last year.
I would argue this. I think that Michigan would have a tougher time beating USC than Ohio State because of the way that they're built.
Yes, they're built to beat Ohio State.
What it's about matchups.
Yes.
And Michigan has built their program entirely to beat Ohio State, where Ohio
Yes.
State has built their program to beat Alabama and Georgia and Clemson.
Absolutely.
And so then along comes this team like Michigan, who doesn't play ball like those teams, and they've been too overly confident, to the borderline arrogant in those games, thinking, oh, they got us last year, but we're going to be fine. We're going to get them this year, right? I mean,
They're not, and they don't have a
right,
coach that's willing to allow his team to be physical
right,
when he
right,
has
because he
athletes.
has to show everyone how smart he is with
Absolutely.
the pass concepts.
Absolutely.
So yes, that's a great point, Sean. It's about matchups. The question was who will be harder to beat. Now, perhaps DC Irish was asking that from a general standpoint, but for Notre Dame, it's going to be that, because I think Michigan would have a hard time with USC's skill, in my opinion. Like, I do. I think they'd have a hard time keeping. I mean, you saw what happened to them in the Cotton Bowl against TCU. Not the Cotton Bowl. What bowl game?
Tulane.
No. I'm talking about Michigan.
Oh, you talking about no, that was
Playoff
the
game.
Fiesta Bowl. Fiesta Bowl.
Fiesta Bowl. Okay, yes,
Yeah.
Fiesta Bowl. They had issues with a quarterback that was mobile and big, tall, fast receivers and they could run the ball.
Yeah.
Ohio State didn't try to run the ball against Michigan. That's the problem right there.
Yeah.
Both years they didn't try to run the ball against Michigan.
Yeah.
They just gave Michigan that.
Yeah.
And so football's matchups, man. It's like, why is Auburn the team that's beat Alabama more than anybody else in the SEC? Why is Auburn that team?
Yes.
Right. It's familiarity, rivalry, that rivalry aspect of it. And they were built in ways that was problematic for Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were the only team willing to say, we're going to go toe-to-toe with you physically, where other teams would just kind of cower and not try to battle them that way in the SEC. So good question, DC.
Yeah.
Archer 452. Speaking of Ohio State, if you had to bet a painful amount of money on offensive production, who do you think Notre Dame scores more or less points in 23 and 22? I'd bet my mortgage on Ohio State or Notre Dame scoring more points in 2023.
Yeah.
And even if I didn't have a lot of faith in the Notre Dame coaching staff that got put together, I would still say that, because last year's team only scored 31.8 points per game. That's it. I mean, they haven't scored that few of points since 2018, and that's only because of how things started at the beginning. I mean, Notre Dame scored, was it 24, 24, and 22 in the first three games. After that, they were going out averaging 40 the rest of the year. And so that's an easy one for me, Archer. Yes, if I had to bet a painful amount of money, and there's nothing more painful than, betting the mortgage on my home, I bet the mortgage on my home that Notre Dame scores more points next year than they did this year. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to have a great offense, but scoring 31.8 points a game is, when you've got Tennessee State on your schedule, when you've got Central Michigan on your schedule. Like, look, Notre Dame played Marshall last year, right? Okay, not whatever. They played Marshall and they played UNLV. But the thing is, Marshall's a good football team. They are. And now Notre Dame, there's no excuse for Notre Dame losing to Marshall. None whatsoever. But Marshall was a team last year that went 9-4 and only gave up 16 points a game defensively. That is a quality group of five football team. Quality group of five football team last year. UNLV was not good. And then the rest of their schedule is Power 5 teams. This year, you're coming to a situation where the two teams at the bottom of the schedule are just going to flat out way worse than the teams at the bottom. So you're basically replacing Marshall with Central Michigan. Marshall won 9 games, gave up 16 points a game. Central Michigan last year went 4-8 and gave up 28 points a game. And so it's a big difference. Gave up 58 points to Oklahoma State, 33 to Penn State, the only two Power 5 teams they played. They gave up 38 to Eastern Michigan, 34 to Bowling Green, 38 to Toledo. It's a much worse defense. And then you're playing Tennessee State, who you'll just overwhelm. So just those games alone are going to pad the stats enough to keep that one rolling. So good question. Craig Bolton asks, what position battles are you looking forward to this spring? And do you see more freshmen getting playing time this fall? I'm going to go reverse a little bit on this, Craig. So the last part, I don't know. It would be pure guess for me to say, oh yeah, we're going to see freshmen play. Pure guess. It's pie in the sky stuff. Because until they do it, I don't know. I don't know how the new coaching staff is going to handle that. I don't know if they're going to scale things back at all. I don't know if the freshmen are going to be ready to play. And if they are, will they give them a chance? I don't know. And part of that's, who steps up in other positions, right? I mean, I expect the freshman receivers to play this year, for example, but what if the guys that come back just have great off seasons and just keep those guys on the bench? This staff could be more willing to play younger players, and those guys still don't play more because of the veterans in front of them. So I just have to see it. I can't say yes on that just yet. As far as what position battles I'm looking forward to seeing this spring, I want to see. I don't even know if I'd call it a position battle, because I don't know if there's position battles in the sense that we might think for like receiver, but I'll call it, for sake of argument, I'll call what's going on at receiver a position battle, because there's going to be more than 3 guys battling to start. But I'm looking forward to that, and I'm hoping that's a good battle, meaning they push each other and challenge each other, because there's definitely some talent there. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to seeing the guard battles. I'm very much looking forward to seeing those. I want to see the safety position, kind of who climbs to the top of that depth chart, is something I'm very interested in seeing. I don't even know if we're going to see a position battle at linebacker. I really don't. I don't have a lot of faith in Al Golden right now, to be completely honest with you, to make the necessary changes. Everything I hear from players, parents, and different people, it's like it's the same old stuff. Nothing's changed. And so I don't have a lot of faith that he's going to make the necessary changes to get younger players on the field. So I don't have a lot of faith there that there's going to be legitimate position battles there. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong on that one, but I just don't. I'm there's nothing I'm more got to see it to believe it mode right now than linebacker coaching. That is the thing I'm least optimistic about. And I hope that I'm wrong on that, but that's the one I'm least optimistic about as of right now. We have another one from Archer 452. Why does Notre Dame's official 2023 schedule graphic look like someone's Dungeons and Dragons campaign art from Microsoft Paint 2003? I don't really know what you're referring to. I don't know what their schedule, their official schedule graphic looks like, to be honest with you. Is it on their website? I'm looking at their website here real quick to see what they have, Sean, but I don't know. I really don't have a clue what he's talking about here. So have you seen that, Sean? Do you know what he's talking about?
I have not seen it, but the fact that he references Microsoft Paint,
Yeah, that's hilarious.
2003, is funny.
Oh, okay, I see it. Yeah, I see what he's saying. So let me bring this up real quick, Sean. I see what he's saying. Yeah, this is legit. So give me 1 second. Let me pull this up. Let me see if I can share this. All right, where are we at here? All right. See that? Yeah, I see what he's saying.
I think they're going for like the Harry Potter Gothic.
Yeah. Some Dungeons and Dragons campaign art. I see what you're saying now. Yeah, I see what you're saying now. Yeah, I see what you're saying now. So yeah, I that's a bit odd. That's not exactly the sharpest schedule graphic in the world. So yeah, I see where he's going with that one. All right, T Guns with an interesting question. If you have to pick one to sit in, would it be morning rush hour or evening rush hour traffic? Evening,
because I'm
I
off
won't have the
work.
stress of the stress
I'm
of
off
getting to work.
work. I'm excited.
Every time somebody brings up getting stuck in rush hour traffic, I have 2 thoughts. Number one is I'm so glad I don't live in a city that's a problem anymore. And unfortunately, I don't think you can say that, right, Sean? Do you have? I mean, there's places you have to go where you.
It's been a while since, because most of the time when I was going to work, I was on the train anyway.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, I haven't experienced
Gotcha.
rush hour traffic like that in a while.
The second one is the intro to Office Space. That's a good one too. I love it. The dude, the Michael Bolton dude, and he's like listening to Scarface.
Yeah.
And he's like singing real loud, and then like a black dude walks by him. He starts and he like slowly goes over and locks the door and turns the music down. And as soon as the guy walks away, he turns back up and he's like hard again. It's like, oh my God. Because we all know dudes like that, right?
Yeah.
We all know that dude that listens to the rap music, but the minute he gets around an actual black person, gets real intimidated and scared and thinks he's going to get robbed. You know what I'm talking about? Like that guy that stereotypes people, even though he likes to claim that
Total
he's down and all
stereotype.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hilarious. That's what makes some stereotypes funny, Sean, is like, that dude. I know that guy. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I went to high school with that dude. I know who that dude is. But then the other one is the guy keeps changing lanes and stops, and then the lane he was in goes past him, and then he tries to get over again, and it stops, and then the lane he was in, you all know that dude, right? Like, or that dude has been you before, where you're trying to manipulate the drive. And I say, yeah, I've been there, I've done that before.
Yeah.
So it makes it funny. All right, Archer 452 says, Sean, if Notre Dame were to drop a game outside of the Big Three matchups, which game would it be? So I guess I'm going to take this one from Sean. Which one do you think it could be? Not which one do you want it to be, but which game would you say outside of the Big Three, which would be obviously Clemson, USC, and Ohio State, would you be most concerned about if you were looking at potential trap games type of thing?
I think I said the Duke game was a trap game, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I just don't know if Duke has enough.
But I think you're concerned there, Sean, if I'm reading you correctly.
I'm more concerned about Notre Dame's.
Right. It's similar to the Marshall game.
Yeah.
It's your mindset could potentially be jacked up from the Ohio State game. Either A, you're incredibly overconfident, there's a letdown because you just beat Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're the emotional disappointment of you just lost to Ohio State. And I think that's what hurt them against Marshall. And then Marshall was good enough to make Notre Dame pay for that. The sloppiness, the mistakes, and all that. Yeah. Duke can't beat Notre Dame if Notre Dame plays anywhere close to their game.
No.
But if Notre Dame comes in with the mental hangover of whatever happens the week before against Ohio State, like they did against Marshall, I think that's a good one. I think that's a really good one. All right, let's get to the next one. It's a good point, Sean. I think that – and here's the other thing about Duke. They have at least a good enough quarterback that can hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Own your day. He's got this here. He says, if Golden chooses Bertrand, Kaiser, and Lufau to once again be the ones, do either of you think Coach Marcus Freeman will overrule him? And two, will it cause Snead, Colley, and or Junior Tuihalamaka to transfer? Just real quick, Junior Tuihalamaka is not a linebacker anymore. I would put Nolan Ziegler into that conversation of potential transfers. So you want to answer that one, Sean? And I have some thoughts on it as well. I'll give you first crack at it.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
That's my I'm trying to be nice. Stay tuned. Just stay tuned, man.
If he goes that route, I will be shocked if all the linebackers stay.
Yep.
Shocked. And if anything, if there's not a real position battle in the spring, I think it could be multiple guys look to go. And now if there's a legitimate battle and guys get beat out, I think they'll understand that. But I think the concern at linebacker right now is that it won't be a real battle. Guy says, hey, Coach Golden will tell you, hey, I need you to get up to this amount of weight. And the guy gets to that and he's having great workouts, but no, I need you to get to this weight now. There's just this constantly moving of the goalposts, which is all designed to make an excuse for not having to play the younger guys. Because you want to run this volume of defense, and in order to run the volume of defense, you need a more experienced player to get all the calls and do all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that'll be a legitimate concern. Now, here's the question, Sean. Will Marcus Freeman overrule him? I don't know, and I'm not overly optimistic about that because I think Marcus Freeman has in my opinion, taken a stance of he's going to let his coaches coach and not be a guy that just micromanages everything. I do, however, think that in certain spots he needs to maybe step up a little bit more and have more of a this ain't going to happen or this guy's going to play. And we saw that in the bowl game. My understanding is the head ball coach was not going to let 17 not play in that bowl game. It was going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, my hope is that Coach Freeman does more of that next year. Hey, 17 and 42, figure it out. Get those kids on the field. That's what you say to your linebackers coach. I don't care if they're starters or number twos or whatever. I have a little difference of opinion on Prince Collie than a lot of fans. I don't think you need to force Prince on the field. I'm not sure if Prince is an every down linebacker right now. He's barely 210 pounds. I think he needs to be a guy that's in the rotation, but I don't know if he's the guy. I'm saying to him, 17 and 42, Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler. Get them on the field some way, somehow. Even if there's not starters, they better have a role. That's simple as that. And then and after that conversation, I'm going to the office with Coach Washington, and I'm going to say this. Number 40 needs to have a role. He doesn't have to be my starter. I got it. Jordan Patelho, we have great expectations, but you better figure it out and figure out a way to get 40 onto the field. That's Josh Burnham. Figure it out, right? And if you can't do that, then that answers a lot of questions that I have about what my staff needs to look like next year.
Right.
That's what I would say to both of them. Just like last year was like, you better figure out a way to get 20 into the rotation some way, somehow. Now, I didn't expect Benjamin Morrison to start, but you better figure out a way to get him in the mix somehow. And Mike Mickens did that. And I'm not saying Mike Mickens was given that ultimatum. I think Mike Mickens would have done that anyway, and I don't think he was given that ultimatum. I think Marcus Freeman had a lot of other things to worry about besides that, right? But those things have been established now. Now he can start to do more dictating of that.
Yeah.
And I would like to see him do that a little bit more on defense. Offensively, I understand that's not necessarily your side of the ball, but you still need to be able to look and say, hey, 25, if we're not getting 25 some touches, what are we doing here? Right? If we're not getting 15 more snaps and touches, what are we doing here?
Right.
Right? I mean, and so those are things that I hope Coach Freeman takes a little bit more of a hands-on approach in that regard. I'm not saying they got to start. I'm not dictating your lineup, but what I am telling you, that guy needs to play more. Figure it out. Figure it out. We'll see if he can or can't. Stephen Doty said, just got out of knee surgery. So if you've already hit this, then ignore. Well, hey, first of all, we did kind of talk about your questions, and we'll address it a little bit. But, man, I hope that your surgery went well. I hope for a nice, easy recovery process. I don't know what kind of knee surgery you had. Hopefully it wasn't too severe, but definitely be in my thoughts and prayers, and I'm sure Sean's as well. To your question, we sort of addressed it a little bit in the past, but I do think it requires discussion here, Sean, is part of the deal is if you're going to put Jared Parker in as the offensive coordinator, you better give him the tools to be successful. And to Steven's question, your thoughts on having Joe Rudolph and Gino Guidugli on staff with Jared Parker, two former offensive coordinators with expertise to help Jared Parker grow and support each phase. I don't think that was an accident that he brought in two guys that have that level of experience in that particular role. And I think that is wise staff building.
Yeah, understanding, right? And all that getting understanding. You have two coaches that can get an understanding of what Jared Parker wants and what he wants to do, and then go and be able to get their positional groups to do that at the highest level of, their play. And I don't think initially that might have been his thought process, but it ended up being the best of both worlds per se, as opposed to what he might have wanted, as opposed to, okay, you know what, the way things have shifted, this is the best way to go and making this change. And I feel like it was actually a blessing in disguise to have a quarterback coach with Jared Parker and now Joe Rudolph, who in a lot of ways is similar to Harry Heastand, that can come in, has the initial respect of the offensive line room, and can continue to build off of that and probably bring some of his little teachings that are a little bit different, but can kind of extend upon developing the offensive lineman and the depth they have in the offensive line room. So it's definitely an advantage, without question. The expertise, Joe Rudolph being an OC before, means that he can understand what Jared Parker is trying to do and what he might be thinking. Like, he can understand the language of an OC. Gino Guidugli has called plays before. He can understand the language. So, you giving the tools, but more than that, giving comfort to a first-time offensive coordinator. That, for me, Jared Parker has to feel comfortable, right? You don't want people on the staff where he might feel like, they're looking over his shoulder, or it's not kind of, everybody's pulling in the same direction. That's the way I feel on the staff. Everyone's going to be pulling in the same direction, and that's to make sure that Jared Parker has everything he needs to be successful as the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. So absolutely, absolutely.
I can't say for sure that that's why Marcus Freeman targeted those two coaches specifically. I'll say this, Sean, and I'm curious your thoughts on it.
Hmm.
I'd be shocked if that wasn't a part of his calculation. Was it the driving force? No, I think the driving force is what we mentioned earlier. I want
Hmm.
people who are going to buy into my vision for building a football program, 100%. But I think beyond that, I think this was another key ingredient to why they were his picks.
Mm.
Because I believe in Jared Parker. This is speaking for Coach Freeman.
Yeah.
I believe in Jared Parker. That's why I brought him in. That's why I brought him in to begin with. Was eventually he was going to run my offense. Maybe it's a year too soon, or not a year too soon, a year sooner than I anticipated.
Than I anticipated.
Because you knew Tommy Reese is going to be gone in the next couple of years. I mean, you knew that 2 to 3 years at the most. So let me make sure that I'm surrounding him with people that can help build him up. Not people that are going to not threaten him and not challenge him, because that's not what winning teams do.
Right.
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 I'm not going to not bring in David Cutcliffe because I'm afraid he's going to challenge me. I'm not going to not want Jamarcus Shepard to be my receivers coach because I'm afraid he's going to challenge me. Like just some different things like that. Not saying that happened. I'm just saying like those are things that we discussed a year ago. It's okay. I'm bringing in this guy because of his expertise and because I don't have it or my OC doesn't have it. And I think that's what good coaches should want. Hey, I know what I don't know. I know you do. So let's work together and get this thing going. And if what I've been told about Jared Parker holds true, Sean, he's going to be a guy that believes in the staff the more guys with good ideas, the better, as long as we all understand once a decision is made, we're all supporting it and rolling with it. I think that's what the best coaches do. Yeah. Ryan B has a comment here, Sean. He says Notre Dame finishes top 10 with the following: Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Florida State, LSU, USC, Texas, and Oklahoma. I am not on the Texas train. I would also be I'm
not on the Oklahoma train either.
I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I could see Texas being a top 10 team this year. It won't be easy, but I could see Texas being a top 10 team this year. Oklahoma, absolutely not. Georgia, yes. Bama, yes. Ohio State, yes. Michigan, probably because their schedule's soft. I mean, they could go 10-2 and still be top 10. They could lose to Penn State and Ohio State and still be top 10 because they're going to be hyped up coming the season.
Hold on now. They take a trip down to Champaign this year too now.
Well, I hope you're right. And Illinois almost beat them this year, right?
Take a trip to Champaign this year.
Speaking of blown calls, reviews, Sean.
Don't get me started.
Michigan probably. Florida State, I'm on that train. I'm on the Florida State train. LSU is an interesting one because here's my thing about LSU for this year, Sean. I think LSU is going to have a hard time being top 10 and also having Alabama, Georgia, and Florida State being top 10 because LSU plays two of those teams.
Yeah.
They have to play Bama and Florida State. And I think the thing for LSU is, Sean, I could see LSU actually being a better team this year and not having their record reflected.
Yeah, I can see that.
And we've seen this before, right? Like I've said this, the 10-3 Notre Dame team from 2017 was significantly better team than the 12-1 team or 11-2 team from 19 or 21. Significantly better. But one year they played like one or two ranked teams, and another year they played 8. Yeah. 17 they played 8. And when I look at LSU next year, I think they're going to be a better team. I do. But they play Florida State in Florida, so it'll be in Orlando. They play at Mississippi State, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, who I think could be okay, at Alabama, and then they have home games against Texas A&M, Florida. I think Auburn's going to be better, and then Arkansas, who I think is going to be a little bit better. So I could see them not being as good next year, not winning the West. I don't think they're going to win the West next year. I think Alabama will, but still be a better team that's trending in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
it does.
I think LSU is going to lose 3 games next year in the regular season, and I think that keeps them outside the top 10. But I think if you're an LSU fan who's willing to look beyond the record, I think you'll be able to say, like, look, yeah, the record wasn't great, but here's what Brian Kelly has to do beyond the record. If they lose to Florida State on a neutral field in Florida, if they lose to Alabama on the road, and let's say lose to at Ole Miss, let's say that's 3 really good football teams next year, Sean.
Yeah.
All away from home, as long as they're competitive. I think that's the bit of the black eye that I see for LSU this year is their losses weren't close. They got their butts whooped in every loss they had. And even the Florida State game ended up being close at the end, but that's more because Florida State did things that let you back in the game, right? Like fumbling the ball to 1 yard line, stuff like that. As long as they're more competitive, they go 9-3 and then make it to a bowl game and they win the bowl game, go 10-3. Actually, you're going in the right direction here.
Honestly, Arkansas fumbled the game away at the end. I mean, they had a chance.
Well, and they had their 3rd and 4th string quarterback in the game at that point in time, right? So, I mean, LSU was not a really good football team this year. They were not as good as their 10 wins. No, you were not. You lost to Texas A&M. You smacked by Tennessee. You beat Bama. Well, so what? Right? Texas A&M beat Bama the year before. They still weren't good.
Yeah.
I actually think they could have a similar record this year and be a much better football team because I think their schedule this year's very tough. LSU, to me, is one of the toughest schedules in college football this year. I mean, look, Florida State on the neutral field, at Ole Miss, at Alabama, home against Florida, home against A&M. A&M is going to be better this year than they were last year. Home against Auburn. They're going to be better this year. I'm sorry, Gus Malzahn's a much better football coach than what Brian Harsin was. Much better fit at Auburn, and they're going to have better they're still going to have good players. At Mississippi State, who's going to be a different team this year. They're not going to be they're going to be more defensive oriented with the new head coach and all that. So it's going to be a very tough schedule for them this year. Very tough schedule. So I could actually see them being a better team, Sean, and not necessarily having the record reflect it a lot. If they go 10-2 this year, that's a pretty darn good year as long as their losses are close. Like if they lose to Florida State in Orlando and they go on the road and lose to Bama and Tuscaloosa, as long as those are close games, if they go 10-2 the rest of the way, that's a heck of a year for them, in my opinion. I just don't know if LSU fans will see it that way. Well, unless Brian Kelly's already been able to successfully convince them to lower the standards like he did at Notre Dame.
As much as we want to just kind of cast them to the side, Clemson is going to have a say in this.
Yeah.
I mean, they play Florida State. They're going to have a say in this top 10.
Yeah.
Right? Clemson, if they win, they lost to South Carolina. If they beat South Carolina, Clemson is looking at an outside chance of making it into the CFP.
And a lot of it's about schedule. I think I could make a case to you this year that LSU will be a more talented team than Clemson this year across the board. And still say Clemson will have the better record. It's because of the schedule. And I look at Clemson's schedule, Sean, at Duke in the opener, then Charleston Southern at home, Florida Atlantic at home, Florida State at home. So again, Clemson gets Florida State at home. LSU has to get on a plane and fly to Orlando and play them in front of a more pro Florida State crowd. All right. They've got to play. They get Notre Dame at home. They get Wake Forest at home. They get North Carolina at home, and then they have road games against Syracuse, Miami, NC State, and South Carolina. So it's a good schedule for Clemson, but it's not as tough as the LSU schedule. And to your point, Sean, the 2 best teams that they play next year, they get at home. And that matters. That's one of the reasons I like Notre Dame taking a jump this year. Part of it is other things, but part of it is last year, 2 of your 3 best teams you played it on the road. This year, 2 of the 3 best teams you play at home. And that matters to me. It does. It does. So I could see that. I could see to me, the thing for LSU is going to be they got to get better on defense. They got to get a lot better on defense. A lot better on defense. But I think their offense is going to score a lot of points this year. I do. Yeah. Have you seen this thing? Some national guy, some LSU radio guy was talking about how they had this thing on. They had some national outlet had something about top quarterback battles, and he was like, "Why isn't LSU on there?" And I'm like, and I'm going to ask Frank McCaffrey this, who's our LSU fan in here. I think there's another
between Jalen Daniels and Nussmeier.
Yeah, Are LSU fans actually thinking that Jaden Daniels shouldn't be the starter this year? I'm not, because like sometimes, personalities on TV or shows, they'll say things to get attention, to get clicks and get discussion going. It's not necessarily the most reasoned thing. Is there a conversation that Jaden Daniels shouldn't be the starting quarterback this year? That seems a little nuts to me. Like, oh, Nussmeier, look what he did against Georgia. Beware of jumping on the hype train of a backup quarterback that comes into a game where there's no pressure on him at all. And I like Nussmeier. Don't get it twisted. I like the kid, but the circumstance he stepped into against Georgia, where the game was already over, is way different than what Jaden Daniels walked into. And here's the thing: LSU's offense was moving the ball in the first half of that game. They shot themselves in the foot and gave up that special teams touchdown, but it's not like the offense wasn't moving the ball that game. They were moving the ball in the first half. Yeah. They just made mistakes, but they couldn't get the ball in the end zone. So that surprised me a little bit. So I'm curious if that's actually a thing, or if that's just somebody trying to say something to stir up the masses and get clicks and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get into the spring and start talking about our sleepers, because you already know it's going to be one or two sleepers.
Oh, yeah.
Teams that come out of nowhere, a la TCU.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. And who, like Michigan in 2021, who saw that coming? Because Michigan was a joke in 2020. They quit on their season. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. They did not play Ohio State, in my opinion, with COVID. They did not play Ohio State because they didn't want to get boat raced by Ohio State. That team had packed it in at that point in time. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, all right, let's get to some more questions here, Sean, from Antoine Johnson. Speaking of Michigan, Brian, college football is moving to more games. It's imperative that you have more depth. Do you think it's possible to have two O-lines? My team has a chance to do this. The advantage you can have is crazy. So are you talking about, Antoine, are you talking about kind of like having like a sort of like a hockey type of like shift where you bring in a second offensive line at that point in time? I think that I'm curious what you mean by that. But I do think that depth is imperative without more games, Sean, because the reality is, he is talking about that, Sean. The reality is just the pace of play, the number of plays being run has gone way up. I don't dispute that. I just don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I do think, in fact, you need to have depth. I honestly would not be opposed to expanding the scholarship limits a little bit. I wouldn't be necessarily opposed to moving it to 90, to be completely honest with you. And, there's a lot of things that could help with that in regard to the transfer portal. You don't have to necessarily go back into the transfer portal to you've got a little deeper roster to choose from. I think there's some things like that.
How about you do it from a recruiting standpoint? You do it similar to the luxury tax.
In regard to what?
In regards to, okay, if you get to your 90 via recruiting, fine. But if you're adding via the transfer portal,
so incentivize.
It's a luxury tax on that transfer portal to incentivize more recruiting. Yeah.
So incentivize having more high school kids on your roster.
Yeah.
So you can only have X number of transfers on your roster.
Yeah.
And so you can have 90, but you can't go beyond X number for transfers.
Yeah.
Let's say it's 5 or 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Scholarship transfers, I should say.
Because transfers are hurting the high school kids.
Yes.
In my opinion. So now, if you increase, you want to make sure that coaches aren't using that to go even crazier in the transfer portal.
It's a good point.
You know what I mean?
It's a great point, Sean. Yeah, it's a great point.
Oh, let's protect these high school kids.
Because to your point, you're saying most likely colleges are going to just go out and get even more transfers.
Yeah.
Which I think you're correct on. And yeah, I agree with that. I like that. I like that caveat, Sean. Like, treating the transfer portal almost like the international market. You can only spend X number of dollars on the international market, right?
Yeah.
And so the other thing I like about it is incentivizing more high school kids, but making the punishment for tampering with college kids even harsher. Where you're going to lose scholarships, you're going to lose your right to bring in a transfer. If you get caught tampering, and I don't care if it's you or someone associated with you or some booster that you have nothing to do with. I don't care if anyone that represents you, officially or unofficially, tampers with a kid, you lose portal privileges for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
And you can't get to 90. on your scholarships then. Like if they did the proposal, talking about maybe jumping up, that Tommy Gunn's had an interesting point. He's to make a transfer count for 2 scholarships. That's kind of along the lines of, so you could either do that. I kind of like the idea of just capping the number of transfers that you can have per year. Now, if you want to have 20 transfers on your team because you bring in 5 a year and they're all young players and they all stay or whatever, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But cap the number you can bring in per year.
Yeah.
So you can't just keep doing what USC's doing, which is basically turning over your entire roster year after year with the transfer portal.
Right. So this is where you get into the luxury tax. If you do that for more than 2 years, right, now we start taxing you on scholarships. Right. You can do it. Right. You can put together this all-star roster for Golden State for 5 straight years, but the amount of money you have to pay to keep that roster in luxury tax, that's on you. If you're willing to pay it, fine. So, if a school is willing to sacrifice 2 scholarships to be able to continuously go and get veteran players in the transfer portal.
Yeah. Here's one for you, Sean. How about this? Because one thought I think of is I do like the option of I would make caveats for first-year coaches. That first year, we will let you go beyond that number.
Okay.
Right? Because I do like the idea of if a coach takes over a new job,
to set his roster and his program.
Yeah. Because he may okay, we'll use Brian Kelly as an example. If you would have capped the number of transfers at 5 for Brian Kelly, he can't put a Division I football roster on the field. They didn't have enough guys.
Right.
He had to go high on the number. Now, he also brought in a lot of high school kids, but he's not like Brian Kelly's not doing what Lincoln Riley's doing, which is just Lincoln Riley brings in a few high school kids here and there. It's transfer.
Right.
Brian Kelly inherited a roster where this is the thing that LSU fans most got in their feelings about was the comment I made where Brian Kelly is inheriting a dumpster fire. They got in their feelings about that. And I'm like, well, and then they would make the case of how great of a job he did. Well, when he got here, they only had 30-some players. So you're saying he inherited a dumpster fire?
Yes.
Do you see the incoherence in your arguments?
Yeah.
Right? And so he inherited a dumpster fire. If he doesn't have access to the portal to bring in a volume of guys, he can't put it. Now you're penalizing him and his staff for the sins of the previous coaching staff. I don't think that's fair either. So I would make caveats for first-year coaches, and I would also maybe say hit a 2-year number. Over the course of 2 years, you can't go X number. So if you go 8 one year, you can only go 2 the next. Maybe something like that too would be, because the other thing is here's where it gets tricky. You also know situations where what if a coach has an abnormally high number of losses from the portal? So that'd be the other thing is there'd have to be some kind of build-in that if you lose X number of transfers out of your program, for every 2 you lose, you can get 1 additional transfer beyond your number.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Beyond your 5 or whatever the cap would be. Yeah. That'd be a very interesting show.
Or you can just allow to have a certain percentage of their roster be transfers. With the exemptions. But if you have like Alabama, Georgia, dude, wait a minute. Now, look, you're getting the best in recruiting and you're going and poaching guys off lower teams rosters.
That's what I hate. Here's my only concern with that is if you're like Lincoln Riley, he brought in a lot of 1-year guys. You could bring 10, 11, 12 1-year guys in. They all leave. And then you can do it again next year because you're under the overall percentage on your roster. And so that's, you know what I mean? Like if he's bringing in 12, 15 1-year guys a year, and you can only have, say, 15, then the next year he loses 5, 10 of those guys, then he can still bring in 10 next year, and he's still doing the volume transfer thing.
For me, it's all about finding a way to protect these high school kids.
Yeah,
in this market.
That's what I'm saying. Cap it on a number per year.
They're the ones that are being hurt.
Right. Yeah. Cap it on a number per year, or a number over a 2-year span. So again, hey, we'll give you the freedom that 1 year where you had a lot of departures to go out there and go higher, but just know you're sacrificing what you can do in the portal next year.
Yeah.
Which is fine, because now, see, that is a strategy that coaches, hey, look, we're going to go out and get 8 portal kids this year because we have a lot of needs.
Right.
But it also means, so now we can start putting more of our emphasis on the junior high school class, because we know that the next year's recruiting class, we can only bring in 2 transfers. So next year's going to be a much heavier high school year for our class. So I think that's where I like that notion of the 2-year cap as opposed to the number, because as you know, Sean, like, you know, teams are going to learn to game the system if they can have X number percentage of your roster, of your 85-man roster. Because then they'll just focus, okay, we're just going to bring in guys that are just 1-year guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can just keep doing this over and over and over and over again. Foskey just ran a 4.64, according to Ryan. He had a 34-inch vertical, had 34-inch arms, had a 10.5 broad, just ran a 4.64. So that's good. That's not light the world on fire. Oh my gosh, we gotta look at him now. But that's 4.64 for a 6'5", 264-pound guy is pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. Yeah. So that's what Ryan just texted me for his first rep. So good stuff there, Antoine. But back to Antoine's point, though, Sean, is I think things like that are needed for depth. And that's where the transfer portal, it can be really challenging, because it doesn't allow you to have the same level of depth at times, especially at the big boy positions, because now you're in situations where your depth is all young kids that aren't ready to play. Yeah. So, yeah, here's another thing I'd like to do, Sean, is I would like to make some – I would like to – if you're going to do all these things to – I wouldn't mind seeing kids have 5 years to play. Like 5 seasons you can actually play.
Okay.
Or extend the red shirt to even more games. If you're going to be playing 17 games a year, make the red shirt, you have to play half or less than half of your regular season games. So give them 6 games to play. And now there gives more leeway to use some of your younger players in certain games to help with your depth problems. Like Notre Dame would have had no problem playing Steve Angeli a couple more times at the end of games late in the year last year if they knew they could play him in 6 regular season games.
Yeah.
And then also remove the bowl games from the if you've played 4 regular season games and your freshman plays or a kid plays in the bowl game, it does not count towards his games played for the red shirt. Those are 2 things I like to see do as well. If you're talking about like helping with depth and needing more players, give coaches the options of playing more guys without burning years of eligibility.
Yeah.
So there's 2 ways you can do that. Is number 1, allow guys to play 5 years.
Yeah.
And and I'm not talking about 5 years like, oh, they can play 5 years. Redshirt. No. Actually play 5 years.
Yeah.
Or add more games onto the redshirt season, which I would lean more towards the redshirt, honestly, Sean, is, give them half.
Yeah.
2 more whole games might be the way to go. Because like if you could play your freshmen in half your games, like if you're Notre Dame, right, like you could say, okay, well, we know we're going to play our best of our best against Ohio State, Clemson, and USC. We're probably going to need to play the best of our best on the road against NC State. Because number 1, you can't travel as many kids.
Yeah.
Because it's a road game. So you can say, hey, look, these 6 games for sure, we plan on incorporating some of our younger guys that we plan to a red shirt. And now they can play more. They can use them more.
Yeah.
And that's where they can help with depth. Because now it's like, okay, against Tennessee State, I'm not going to have J.D. Bertrand and Jordan Patejo running down on kickoff against Tennessee State. Right? Now, they may be starters on my special teams against Ohio State and NC State and Clemson and USC, but that's a game where I can use one of my freshmen because we know we're going to kill Tennessee State. We know we're going to kill Central Michigan. So now all of a sudden you can make some of those changes without knowing that you got more leeway for these kids to play. Or say, here's another one, Sean. You can, if you play 4 or less games as a position player, you can still redshirt no matter how many games you play on special teams. So if I play Jalen Sneed in every game I have as a kickoff, kick return, punt cover guy, but only plays 4 games on defense, he redshirts.
Right.
That's another way to help with depth, because now I'm taking some of that pounding away from my veterans who don't necessarily need to be on special teams. They can, but now I've got more bodies to choose from without blowing redshirt seasons for those guys. That's another one that I would consider doing.
Yeah.
So,
and I think like Tommy Guns, like I was seeing what he was saying in the chat, like my whole thought process, I'm not trying to be complicated. I'm trying to find a way to help the high school.
Yes. Incentivize bringing in high school recruits.
Taking away a scholarship. Dude, you're not about to deter coaches from going and getting a good veteran player. They will give up the extra
Yes.
scholarship in a
Right.
heartbeat. But so you're still hurting the high school players. Like big time programs, they don't care. They're like the Rams. What did the Rams say? They were like, dude, draft picks mean nothing to us.
Right.
Like, go get the best players. We're trying to win a
Right.
championship. That's Alabama and Georgia. That's not a deterrent to them.
Right.
They will be like, cool, take the scholarship, give me that top running back. Give me that top
Especially
defensive
state
lineman.
schools, Sean, that can bring in more
Absolutely. Absolutely.
to get to their numbers.
Absolutely. So no, I'm looking for a system and finding a way to help these freshmen not get left out in the cold
Right.
because these schools are lazy and just want to go poach rosters.
Yeah. So I think that's where the incentivizing and then de-incentivizing things needs to come into play, Sean, is in
Yeah.
that regard. Here's another thought too. Cap them on the number of, instead of making the red shirt not be about games, make it be about number of plays.
Mm,
So if you play less than 150 snaps over the course of a year,
yeah.
so like if you only bring in a guy to play 10, 12 snaps a game as part of your depth piece, at the end
Yeah.
of the year, he has 150 snaps. That's going to be better for that kid than playing 40 snaps against 4 teams,
Yeah.
that you're blowing out, right? So you could, there's a lot of things you could do if they really wanted to get creative to improve your ability to use depth, right? Because again, what should this all be? Well, we're trying to reduce the number of plays. Okay, then stop making eligibility be built on games, have it be built on plays. So there's all types of things that they could do to have
Do you
this.
believe in restrictions? Now, there used to be, I don't know if this still exists in college basketball, but certain coaches had the power to tell you the schools that you could not transfer to. Like, you want to transfer? That's
Yeah.
fine. But you're not transferring within the SEC.
Yeah. I don't like that.
You transfer outside the conference, inside the conference, because for me, I'm like, okay, cool. Well, it didn't really make a difference. I just don't understand. And these are kids. Look, you just won a national championship with Georgia. You want to go to Alabama? That's where you want to go?
Sure.
It's
Sure.
like, all right.
Yeah. I understand where you're going with that one, Sean. I've never liked the fact that coaches could control where a kid went. I think that here's the thing I would say. I would have more support for your restrictions now than I would have before.
Mm-hmm.
So say, look, one-time open transfer portal, but if you transfer within your own conference, you have to sit out a year. I would be more supportive of that now than I was before. When coaches could say you can't transfer in your conference, I hated it. I hated it. Hated it, hated it, hated it. I'm a believer in having guys sit out a year for transfer for a host of reasons. I've already stated those before in the past. We'll need to rehash those again. I don't think there should be a one-time transfer portal rule that's just blanket. I think there should be legitimate exceptions where consistency is applied if you can show proof that the hardship you're claiming is there. I've also said make your NLI, National Letter of Intent, more of a true contract. Meaning, if we promised you playing time, the number 1 jersey, a certain dorm,
more than a 1-year contract.
No, a full contract, meaning like you're making it a 4-year contract.
Yeah, because most of the time it's literally a 1-year contract.
Right. That's a lot less now with SEC still that way, but like a lot of other leagues have adopted more of a 4-year contract. But the 4-year contract, but you can still force a kid out if you want. Let's be real about that.
Exactly.
So you make it to where during your recruitment, you've made me X promises, right? And if you're going to promise me 13 mil on NIL, you better be willing to put it in the contract. And if you're not willing to put it in the contract, then it's not real.
Right.
You promised me the number 1 jersey. You promised me a starting position. You promised me, I'd get to live in this dorm. You promised me I wouldn't have to take this class or whatever. Anything a coach is want to promise you, if he's not willing to put that into your contract, then he's not promising it to you.
Yeah.
Right. So put that into contract. And if the school does not live up to its end of the bargain, then you get automatically exempt. Bam, you can transfer one time at the end of the season, right? You promised me I was going to start as a freshman. You didn't live up to it. Hey, you weren't very good. That wasn't part of the conversation. You said I was going to start as a freshman.
Yeah.
Right? The other schools said, if I'm good enough, I'll start. I picked you because you said I would start or I would play. Me not being good enough, no, but that's not what we agreed to. As long as then you should have put that in the contract. As long as I'm good enough. You promised me the number 1 jersey. Well, our team captain decided he wanted to have it. Don't care. You promised me the number 1 jersey, right?
Right.
You didn't live up to that. I'm out.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like you can say that's petty, but like, look, how about you make the schools live up to the things that they're selling these kids of why they're going to get to go there, and if you don't live up to your contract, then you get to leave. But as long as the school honors that contract, then you have to honor your contract unless there's a penalty of you have to sit out a year. Now, I also have said if you go to a new school and you remain in good academic standing and you are on pace to graduate with a certain period of time, you get that year of eligibility back. So you may have to sit out a year, but it doesn't cost you a season of eligibility, right? Because right now, if like you redshirt as a freshman and then transfer and have to sit out a year, you've now lost 2 years of eligibility.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if I redshirt as a freshman, don't play, and then transfer and have to sit out in the next year, I still have 4 years left to play after that, as long as I graduate within a certain amount of time, right?
I can see that.
Because then you're incentivizing kids to, hey, keep going to class,
Keep
do
going
what
to
you need to
class,
do.
what you do.
You're not going to lose your eligibility. See, because now you're getting all the positives of what the sit out a year rule is for. There's a lot of good that comes from forcing kids to really think about, do you really want to do this? Because you can't play football next year, right? You know this, right? But yes, I know that, but I really do need to get closer home. I really have a parent that's sick or a parent going through a job loss or I don't like it here. I thought I would, whatever the reason, you better really make sure you're serious about this because you can't play football next year, like on games. And, that's what I would do. You can't do these BS things that somebody's got, just make up some story about somebody said something mean to me one time and I'm using that as my reason that's really why I'm transferring, when we all know that's bullcrap.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I would say make it like that. And so if you're willing to do all those kind of things, Sean, then then we could find a happy medium here. Then because what we're doing now is just stupid. And what they were doing before was just stupid. Inconsistent application of transfer rules like you had that kid from the transfer to NC State. He had a legitimate like parental situation that was really hurting his family. The Luke Ford thing to Illinois.
Yeah.
That was nonsense that the NCAA didn't let that kid play right away.
Yeah.
There was just but you're going to let Justin Fields play right away. You know what I mean? It's just the inconsistent why could like Alohi Gilman? Alohi Gilman had a great reason to transfer, and they didn't honor it. That was nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. They should have allowed him to play. But then there's times like, dude, you're just moving because you're buried in the depth chart. Like, no.
Yeah.
It's like you and I were talking about this with Notre Dame. Remember all the guys in Notre Dame had it running back in like 1990 and all that?
Mm-hmm.
And then this guy moved over here. This guy moved over there. This guy waited his turn. That doesn't happen now. Jeff Burris doesn't move to cornerback or defensive back.
No.
Right? Guys like that transfer now. Now, they still have transfers. Dorsey Levin's transferred. But Reggie Brooks, the minute they tell Reggie Brooks to transfer in modern time, maybe he's like, forget that, I'm going to Oklahoma State.
Yep.
Right? And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. That didn't help him. It wouldn't help Jeff Burris to leave because he wanted to play running back and they didn't give him a chance to play running back, right? I'm just using him as an example because you had him on your show recently. So that's kind of where I'm at that with that one.
And you know what? But in the spirit of that, most football players that I know just want to play. So as much as he was like the 5th guy on the running back depth chart, Lou Holtz was like, yo, I need you to play defensive back.
Right.
You're going to play next week against Tennessee.
Right. But,
okay.
But you and I both know younger kids nowadays aren't being raised to be that way.
No.
If things aren't going your way, you're out. You know?
He was just happy. Him and Willie Clark were just happy to be on the field.
Yep.
Like, we get to play as true freshmen. All right.
Let's get to some last few questions here. We're going from Stephen Doty. Would love to hear about Billy Strauss' agility and feet for moving in space. You want to take first crack at that, Mr. Davis?
You know what? Billy was injured during the fall.
Spring.
Oh, during the spring. Yeah. So we didn't get a chance to see him. And then during the fall, we only got what 2 or 3 practices to really
Right.
view them. So for me, there were a couple of guys. I was amazed by Ty Chan's just flat out size as a human being. He's, he's just a massive dude. Um, Harmony is another massive guy, and I was amazed by the strength of Emil Wagner. Billy Schrouf, you know, coming back off injury, I can't really speak to it, Brian, because I really didn't see too much of him. So I don't want to overstate what I didn't see, try to make it seem like, oh yeah, I didn't, man, I really didn't see too much of him because other guys caught my attention when I happened to be watching a few times we're in practice in the fall. Maybe you have more
Well, I
insight
mean,
into
just looking
Billy.
at what we saw from him in high school, I mean,
Hmm.
it's just as long as he keeps progressing, certainly the athleticism was there. I
Yeah.
mean, he's a guy that was explosive off the ball, Sean. I'm actually going to pull up some of his highlights while we're talking here, so we can kind of get a refresher course on what he was in high school. But I mean, look, he was a really talented player in high school, and
Yeah.
and a reason that we liked him is part of it, Stephen, was that he was big and physical, but the other part of it, he could really move. I mean, one of the things that I always said about Billy is I actually thought he had the foot quickness and length to play in space as a tackle. I just thought his demeanor was more guard oriented. And now he doesn't have great length. He's more like in the Zach Martin type of tackle length, right? But athletically, I think he moves very well. And there's another defensive clip here later. This isn't the one, but there's another defensive clip here later. We just see him explode off the ball, and you see that foot quickness. But yeah, I think he's definitely a guy. To me, look, athleticism is exactly what you love Billy Schrout. Like you said, Sean, he's a big physical dude, but he also moves extremely well, and he's
Yeah.
got good change of direction. He's got good balance, good feet, good hips. I mean, he was a guy that I graded. I think this is the clip on defense. This is just from one high school game. Look at that quickness off the ball. I mean, I think he could absolutely be a guy that can move in space. I think he'd be a great pin and pull guy in those type of looks we talked about. I think he's got a chance to be a very effective guy getting onto the second level. And I see, it's not like, look, like right here, he's not moving fast, but look how easily he moves right there, right? Like he's not moving fast, but just you can just tell he's kind of a nimble guy, kind of an athletic guy, kind of smooth, just like light on his feet. He does a lot of things like that where you're just like, boy, this guy's a pretty explosive athlete. So I think Billy Schrout is definitely a guy that athletically uh, you're going to like what you see from him. As long as, again, the weight gains aren't like, oh, I love that play right there. Just gets under that guy's pads and just buries them. But I think athletically, he's got all the tools you want to be an elite guard: size,
Yeah.
strength,
Yeah.
athleticism, all of it. I
Yeah.
think he's outstanding. I mean, again, he was a top 100 graded kid for me that had 5-star upside. I think he was my number 2 offensive signee in that
Hmm.
class, Sean. I'm going to pull it up right now. I believe he was just behind Tobias. I think Tobias is the only guy that I had ranked ahead of him on the defensive or on the offensive side of the ball last year. I'm just going to pull this up here real quick. So I had
Uh,
Tobias number 1, and then I had Billy Stroud number 2. Yeah, ahead of Jadarian Price, who was number 3, and ahead of Eli Raridon, who was number 4. So that tells you how much I thought of him. Top 100 guy, 5-star upside. So
yeah.
yeah, a lot of that was about the
And we kind
athleticism.
of talked about that early when we were talking about Joe Rudolph. Just
Yeah.
to answer that question, to add on to it, we talked about having a combination of him and Andrew Kristofic at the guards and what they can do
Mhm.
to get those guys outside, pull, get them moving along the offensive line because they are athletic. So it's a good question.
Yeah, I think fans are gonna like Billy Schrout a lot. A lot. They're gonna love that kid. And a lot of stuff we heard about him, and I'm not saying he's gonna be as good. They're different players. Quentin was 340 pounds. But a lot of stuff you hear about him, powerful hands,
Hmm.
explosive off the ball, nasty, mean.
Who was
Same
that
exact
that
stuff we
talked
heard about
about him?
Quentin.
Who was that? Was that
Howard
Howard
Cross.
Cross that talked
Yeah,
about Billy Schrouf and
yeah.
bowl prep? Yeah,
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 and I'm not
yeah,
even talking about that. I'm talking about what coaches and other players say, like, behind the scenes about him,
yeah, yeah.
is a lot of the same stuff we heard coming out of 2014 about Quentin Nelson. Again,
Hmm.
there's different players. I mean, Quentin's Quentin. He's unique. He's a
Right,
unicorn.
right.
But you hear a lot of the same a s talent and attributes and demeanor things that you heard about Quentin, and that's a good thing. It's
Yeah,
definitely a good thing.
really good thing.
Stephen Doty also asks Sean, he goes, Tobias Merriweather at X and who at Z? As much as I like Tobias Merriweather's potential, it seems that Z will be essential to open up the middle of the field. Expect that increasing tailback wheel, flare, et cetera, will help. So just so we're on the same page on the positions, the X is the field outside guy, the Z is the slot, and the W is the boundary. I view Tobias as someone who can play X or W. I prefer him at X. I want him to the field. And to your point, I think that I want a guy that's going to open up the middle of the field at tight end and Z to be doing it more so of stuff that is causing guys to close on them. So for me, I'm going to run 4 verts. I love 4 verts. I love stuff out of 4 verts. I like running 4 verts. I love running vertical concepts where like my number 2 or number 3 guy may break off at 15 on an out or an under, something like that as a wrinkle to my 4 verts. I'm also someone who likes having the post snap side adjusts on 4 verts. If a guy bails, you get to 15, you break it off on a stop or a comeback or whatever, depending on however you want to teach it. Teams do it differently. But those are things I'll do. But I'm a ins, outs, overs, crossers, options type of guy with my inside guys. And with the goal being, I want to get the safeties locked in on them and thinking I got to step down.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm taking the top off with my outside.
Yeah.
Is where I'm at. So, so for me, you talk about a tailback wheel. If I were going to do something like that to the field or out of a trip, Sean, I'm going to have a post with my number 1. That'd be the X. And I'm going to have my Z running some sort of deep in or some sort of over, some sort of option route. And then I'm sending my tailback on a wheel. So I'm taking the coverage here. Mm-hmm. And then I'm getting my tailback on a wheel against a rover or a linebacker. Okay. Is what I'm looking to do. So yeah, I like those type of concepts. I'm a fan that I like running the traditional flood concepts with a back instead of. I mean, you can do it out of a trips, but I also like doing it out of backs. I think that presents a different type of advantage where at a trips your number 3 inside guy is bumped out more.
Bumped out a little bit, yeah.
Whereas if I'm in 21 personnel and I got a split backfield out of gun. Now that number 3 guy and the number 2 guy in some instances are both going to be tucked in more, which now gives me some leverage opportunities to the outside with my pass game. So like
more room.
Right. It allows me to get more isolation type of stuff. So there I like mixing it up. I like it out of both, but I think those are different things to really building those concepts.
I think Kansas City does that a lot. Like they flood with their running backs.
Yeah.
I like
but
that.
I think you have to have a field outside guy that can take the top off the defense to really have the maximum potential. And I think Tobias can be that kind of guy. Now, I also like putting him in the slot at times. I'm all about moving guys around. As long as they know the basic principles of what they're doing. There's certainly some ISO looks. Hey, against this team, we're gonna get this guy in the slot because we think we know the look that we can get this week against him. And we think that, if we put him in the slot on this particular play that we can get, a wrinkle that we really like. So, I mean, there's always going to be some of that, but that doesn't matter where you're playing. I've seen teams do that with their boundary receiver, where you bring him over in a 3-by-1, we have the tight end backside. And now all of a sudden your boundary receiver is your number 3. Yeah. And you get him in a look that allows you to isolate him. That doesn't mean you're doing it all the time with him, but it does mean you're putting him in a situation where, you're able to get an ISO with him. So, I mean, you look at this year, for example, Tobias was an X, but where did his one catch come from? Where did his touchdown come from? They put him in the slot.
On the slot.
And
they should have had another one against Syracuse in the slot.
Yeah, that's right. The ball gets thrown a little bit sooner. But you did it out of 12 personnel.
Yeah.
Which is where if you're doing that at 12 personnel, your X, your W is now going to be the outside guy, and your X becomes the inside guy.
Right.
And that's the look they had it. So there's always types of ways within the structure of your defense that you can get him in that kind of isolation that I like. But the fact of the matter is you've got to be able to take the top off your defense with your field receivers, especially your outside guy. And I think that's essential to me. But you also have to especially the backs Notre Dame has. What was one of the things we complained about last year? Drew Pine, bro, you just ran verts. The entire eight of the defenders ran vertical.
Running
Audric
back up the
Estime
back.
standing over there in the flats with no than 20 yards of him, bro. Check it down, cuz it's 3rd and 5. There's no one near him. It's all good. You're allowed to do that. That's within the rules, right? Go watch Ian Book. He was captain check down. He did that all the time. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to do that.
Cuz, let me crip walk.
I mean,
You said, cuz.
get the ball outside, you know? So
Man.
it's there. But I also like doing stuff where you scheme. I mean, Tyler Buckner's first career touchdown pass was on a little quick running back wheel where you ran the coverage off and got him ISO'd on a linebacker. Tyler gets moving. That guy comes up, check that sucker over top. So it's got to, you want to get your backs involved in that stuff, but it's more of a, if they jump the depth, then you've got that check down.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to be a big part of that's an offense that's more efficient. But then also being able to use your backs as route runners, free release route runners is also effective, which we saw last year as well. So yeah, really good question there. We have a super chat here from Michael S. Was Harry Heaston thank you for the super chat, Michael. Was Harry Heaston a detriment to the coaching staff unity? He seems a power unto his own. Harry Heaston is a power unto his own. But I do not view Harry Heaston as a detriment to staff unity. No. I mean, you listen to Al Washington and the things he says about Harry Heaston and how Harry Heaston made him a better coach and how he would go over to Harry Heaston and pick his brain. And Harry Heaston was absolutely like, yeah, let's talk. Let's do that. Dylan McCullough talked about that, about how, Sean, you were talking about this the other night, how Heaston could go up to the running backs and speak to them and tell them what to do. And it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, listen to what Coach Heaston said. Yeah. That's not because Dylan McCullough's afraid of nobody, right? Let's be real about that. It's because it's a respect thing. And that's where it comes from. That's the respect you have for your offensive line coach. You better have an offensive line coach that you respect. If you're a running backs coach and you don't have an offensive line coach that you would allow to speak to your backs, then you need a new offensive line coach.
Yeah.
So, but yes, he is a power unto his own. He's going to do it his way. There's no question about that. But I don't think that is something that leads to necessary staff unity because you knew that coming in. You didn't hire him thinking he was going to let me come into his room and talk to his guys. No, you hire him because you're going to go let him coach the offensive line.
Yeah.
But he was also a part of the staff. So I don't think that was an issue to me. All right, next question here, Sean, from Robert Bishop. What is your guys' take on the Jalen Carter news? So, Sean, you want to just update people who may not know that situation real quick?
I think reckless driving, and I forget the other misdemeanor charge. He left the combine yesterday, posted bail last night, $40,000, and stayed at the police office down there in Athens for 18 minutes and was released. He posted his response on Instagram and said he feels like he'll be fully exonerated of all the charges. Someone died. There's 3 vehicles involved. It seems from the video that was viewed by the Atlanta Constitutional Journal that they were all racing. They got to a curve, and unfortunately, the one vehicle that ended up crashing couldn't make the curve, going at a speed of 104 miles per hour, and individuals passed away. I don't think there's any culpability or any way to blame Jalen Carter for those deaths because people made the decision to. He didn't force anyone to drive.
Right.
So you can't blame him for the deaths, but he's involved in a situation where you question, knowing what's ahead of you.
Yeah.
At that point in time, I don't think his blood alcohol was above the legal limit. I know the person that was driving the damaged vehicle, the injured, the damaged vehicle that crashed, was above the legal limit from an alcohol standpoint. But they're finding
Sean, who was driving that other car? Was it the girl, the staffer, or was it the offensive lineman?
No, it was the offensive lineman.
The one that passed away, or the one that got hurt?
The one that passed away. The one that passed away. So, I think he made impact. I think according to the report, he made impact on the left side and then made impact on the right side when they spun, and the impact on the right side killed the passenger. But it's unfortunate. The biggest thing for me, Brian, look, if I'm a GM, I could live with speeding. And I can live with speeding. I can't live with lying to the police and misleading them. I can't.
And that's
That's
really the big thing, right, Sean?
that's
So
that's why I get
he
off.
fled the scene
Yeah, that's where I get off.
and lied to the police about his involvement in it.
Yes.
And that's why these charges came so late.
Yeah.
Because they're just now getting to the investigation and the footage and
Mhm.
all that and figuring out who was who.
So that within itself, that speaks to your integrity.
Yeah.
If he had stayed there and said, "Look, man, this is what happened. Sorry. Take the misdemeanors. Take the
Yeah.
misdemeanors." He's probably still going to be drafted in the top 10 if that happened. Now, once you start bringing in the fact that you misled the police officers and lied, that's a whole nother can of worms that deals with your integrity.
What's the expression, Sean? The cover up is always worse than the lie, right? Of a
Yeah,
crime,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, the reality is he started thinking about his future way too late, in my view.
Well,
You
no, he
should
started
no
he started
no
thinking about his future when he left and
no.
drove
That's what I'm
off
talking
from the
about. No,
scene.
no.
Yeah,
Let me finish what I'm
yeah.
saying. He started thinking about his future too late.
Oh,
What I mean by
absolutely.
that
Yeah,
is
yeah,
he started thinking about, oh my God, how it's going to affect my future after the
yeah,
accident.
yeah.
You should have freaking thought about that before you started
Before you
street
started,
racing.
yes, yes,
And
yes.
so I have serious concerns about his decision making. In so many, I mean, there's so many different things along this lines for him that you just say, boy, this is just you made a lot of stupid decisions. And the whole he's young. I get all that. I get he's young. He's old enough to know better. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Right? Like there's too many times that we absolve young people of things where they're at an age where guys are going into their third tour of duty in the in the Eastern Front of World War II at that age, right?
yeah,
And so horrible decision making, incredible immaturity to the point where you're like, yeah, you got to have legitimate questions about his character to a degree.
yeah,
Having said that, this is a little bit of a different situation than maybe some other things where it's an awful situation that shouldn't be minimized. He should not have been street racing. He should not have fled the scene. There's a lot of things that led to that you should not have put yourself, but he didn't shoot someone, he
yeah,
didn't beat a female, he didn't, he wasn't selling drugs, he wasn't doing a drive by. I mean, there's a lot of things you see people like, okay, he didn't beat up a woman in an elevator. Like there's so many things where like, should he have some sort of punishment for what he was involved in? Absolutely, because you fled the scene and you lied to the cops. There's some circumstances. There's some consequences that need to happen because of this. Should his future be completely defined and ruined because of this? No, but you better show me that you've learned from it. That's my
yeah.
thing, right?
I,
So there are some crimes that you can commit at 21 where I'm like, bro, you have sacrificed your opportunity to be a free citizen in this country, right?
yeah,
This is not that. There need to be consequences. He's going to fall in the draft, and I think rightfully so, because I'm not giving that much money to a guy that has this level of terrible decision making, and now I'm going to give him tens of millions of dollars. No, right? I'm gonna feel really nervous about that to a degree, but I also don't think this is something where he should never play in the
and
NFL. He
more.
should that kind of thing. I don't think it's that either.
You're spot on, and more than likely, see, it's crazy. He's going to end up on a good team
Yeah.
instead of
Well,
ending up on a bad team. He's going to drop, and he's going to drop to the teens, and he's going to end up on a team that was a playoff team on the fringe
yeah.
of the playoffs, and he's going to be in a really good position. He's going to make less money, but it's
But
going to be a good
hopefully,
position, a
hopefully
good
that comes with
organization.
exactly. Hopefully that comes with being on a like one of the things that I thought was the biggest benefit to Von Miller's career. Because remember, Von Miller got into some stuff early in his career too.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
like this, but just he was a guy.
yeah,
And I think Von Miller has said this, and I believe that the arrival of DeMarcus Ware is what set Von Miller on a Hall of Fame caliber path. Because I don't think Von Miller had the maturity to be what he became prior to DeMarcus Ware saying, "Hey, man, you got all the gifts in the world, but let me help you grow up not just as a football player, but as a man." And
Let me tell you something.
yeah,
I had a moment of gratefulness when I heard this young man's story, because I can't get on a soapbox and preach to this young man. I
Who you
remember
talking about
being,
Jalen? You talking about Jalen Carter?
yeah, I remember
Okay.
being 19 and coming home, and my dad went out of town, and I pulled his Corvette out, and I definitely hit 100 on the expressway. So I was like, yo, it's nothing but the grace of God that nothing happened to me and I didn't impact somebody else's life doing something pretty stupid
Mhm.
at 19 years old, right? And this is the crazy thing. I was fine driving 100. It was a straightaway. I was fine. It wasn't until I hit the brakes and the car reacted the way it reacted that I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
wait a minute. That was because the 100 was so smooth
Yeah.
and easy that it was just like, oh man. And then when I hit the brakes and things started, I was like, wait a minute, okay, I'm never doing this again. Like this
Sh-
is the dumbest thing I could have ever
Sean, I
done
had a
in my
brand new
life.
Ford Mustang in college. So yeah, I've hit those speeds before. But here's the thing I'll say though, real quick, Sean. This isn't the first time this has happened with him. There's reports out today. Several months ago, he got pulled over for going 89 and a
See
45.
that's now you're talking about a trend that has been set.
That's my issue.
And
That's
so
my issue.
that no, I
Right.
don't do. We've had Chicago Bears players like with issues with speeding on the expressways here, pulling
Right.
their cars over, leaving them on the side of the road when they're intoxicated. All it's
Right.
look, that's a problem with professional football players more than people know. What's the
And
kid that just
that's
got
why my
arrested?
concern is for Jalen Carter.
Yeah,
And that's why I brought the point, Sean, of now you're going to hand him tens of millions of dollars.
yeah, yeah,
Right. That's where if I'm a
yeah,
GM, I'm having major reservations because this isn't a one-time thing. So it took
yeah,
someone to die
yeah,
before you realize, gee, this was stupid.
yeah. What
Right.
was that?
That's my
Ruggs,
concern.
right? Henry Ruggs that killed somebody
Right.
out in Vegas,
Right. But that'll never
ruined
happen
his
to
career.
me, is the
Right,
reaction the kids will have.
right.
Right. And those are just, I mean,
Look, man, you don't understand
when
how
you're
fortunate
investing
you
tens of
are.
millions of dollars into people, things like this
Yeah.
have to be taken into account.
Yep.
And it was all unavoidable with better decision making. And that's my whole thing is we don't have enough of we're not holding young people to enough accountability now. We're just like, oh, they're just college kids. I'm so sick of the we're just college kids thing. It's like, Sean, you made a point. Well, like, hey, I did this when I was younger. And that's why, as a parent, you have that talk with your daughter to make sure
Mhm.
she doesn't do the same.
Mhm.
Hey, learn from my mistake.
Yeah.
Well, you did that when you were 18. Yeah, exactly. And I'm very lucky to be here. Don't learn from my mistake. And I feel like we're doing too much of
Hey,
with young people.
I learned from my own mistake.
Right.
Like I did, I do. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that again.
Right.
And after getting pulled over for 89, he should have look,
Yeah.
this maturity, understanding the big picture, understanding like I am months away from being a millionaire and getting everything that I work for. And I'm about to risk that for this?
Right.
I'm
Right.
about to risk all of that for this
Because look,
temporary moment of exhilaration. It's crazy.
like, does he get into that race thinking, "Hey, someone could die here"? I promise you that didn't cross his mind. But that's part of the problem. Is too many young people think they're invincible and they can just kind of do whatever, and it's just whatever happened to so and so is not going to happen to them. And my whole point is if there were greater consequences for our decisions, then people might think twice. It might be enough to think twice before you do these kind of things. And
I was
that's my thing.
I was shocked it was only a misdemeanor.
Right.
At that speed, I'm like, man.
Right. Right. All right. Timeout Tom asks, I'd like to see Notre Dame take advantage of Coach Mason's genius and return some kicks a yard or two in the end zone. Do you agree?
Mm.
It depends for me, Sean.
You gotta
There's
be
some teams
special.
I'm not running out of the end zone against. I don't care who
Mhm,
I have. Because it's all about this is where analytics to me can come in helpful, right?
mhm.
Like it's all about I want to start my drives as far down the field as I possibly can. And against some teams, I don't think they're a good kick return team, and I'm willing to maybe get pinned at the 18 once because I think the next one we can break for 6, right? Against other teams, I'm going to be like, nah, they're too good. They get down there too fast. It's too risky because we may get pinned at the 12, right? And they've got a good defense. So part of it to me, timeout, Tom, it depends on who you're playing. The strategy, hey, their defense isn't very good, so I'm willing to risk Sean getting pinned at the 15, right? Like against some teams, their defense stinks. We're going to rip them up, so I'll take that chance.
Yeah.
Against other teams, their kick coverage and their defense is too good for us to start being pinned
Deep
at
in
the 12.
yeah.
And then we get stopped, and now we're punting out of our own end zone, and they're getting the ball at midfield. There's like just potential of just no. Let's start at the 25 and be ready to roll. Against other teams with maybe a weaker defense, or your offense outmatches them big time, so you're okay maybe putting your defense in a bad spot a couple times because that they should dominate this matchup, or your offense is way better than their defense. Where, hey, let's take a chance on it, right? It just depends on the game and the matchup, but yeah, I mean, I think I would like to see them be more aggressive with kick returns. A yard or two is the end of where I would go with that. But the other thing too is I'm telling my kick returner, I would have him count. Like if a guy kicks the ball and it gets to you in a hurry, okay, take that one. See where the defense is before you return it. Take a peek. If it gets to you in a hurry, return it.
Yeah.
If that sucker hangs up there more than 1,000, 2 1,000, okay, we're not returning that one. But that's the other part of it too. That's just where the reps come into play. You know when a ball gets to you faster than normal, and you know that they're not going to be down as far. Take that chance. Right. You also know where I may be catching it at the 2, but this guy hung that sucker up, so I'm fair catching it.
Yeah.
Right? We're starting at 25. So there's strategy involved in that, just like everything else, in my opinion. Broke Neck Boy said, if Notre Dame lost to Tennessee State, would it be a bigger upset than App State over Michigan? Way bigger. Because App State was a much better team than Tennessee State is. Much better. I mean, App State back then, Sean, was one of the premier football teams in Division I AA. I mean, they were a tremendous team.
Yeah.
And had won 2 straight national championships coming into that matchup against Michigan, because that was 2007, right?
Yeah.
They'd won the previous 2 national titles and then won another one that year. Tennessee State had a losing record last year. So, yes, that would be a much bigger upset than App State over Michigan. Way bigger. Way bigger. You agree, Sean?
I agree.
Yeah.
Won't happen, but.
No. Next question is from, let's see here. Last one. We're going to get to this last one from Mark Brown. Mark asks, how about setting this is referring to the transfer and the rosters and scholarships, right?
Mm-hmm.
How about setting overall percentage plus yearly and 2-year limits with the exceptions for new coaches and a 1-on-1 trade-off for each transfer out of the program? I think my concern about that is you start getting coaches into running players off in order to open up a spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But overall percentage, Sean, that's kind of the point you made earlier. Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you up it to
it.
90, if you upped it to 90 and just said only 5 of the scholarships could be for transfers, whatever percentage that is, 85 or 90, unless you have an exemption as a first-year coach to build your roster, that, in my opinion, that would benefit high school recruits, but coaches will find some type of, like you said, the walk on. They will find some way to get guys on their roster.
We gave some kid a scholarship last year.
Yeah.
We make him leave, and now we can take in a transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the only way to this is my opinion, and I'm sure there's other good proposals. Just for me, I think setting a hard 2-year cap is the way to go. And then creating penalties for people that go beyond that.
Yeah.
Is what I would do.
Yeah.
So like, hey, you bring in more transfer than you're supposed to. Okay. That's fine. We're not going to punish the kid, say you're not eligible or whatever, but you can't bring in a transfer for 3 years, or that kid's automatically ineligible. They'll be ineligible. Things like that. I think the one reason that you don't see tampering in professional sports is not a lack of desire. It's the consequences are too great.
Yeah.
That's why they don't do it.
Yeah.
You're not willing to give up a first round draft pick. And you're not allowed to and you can't sign that guy now.
Yeah.
Like that guy can't play for me now. I tampered. He can't sign with me.
So
like the Miami Dolphins would have gladly given up a first round draft pick if it meant they could get Tom Brady and go win Super Bowl. But then once that launched, you can't sign Tom Brady.
Nope.
And you lose a first round draft pick.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, there need to be strong financial, punish them. I'm not going to punish the players, right? Like if a kid comes and I'm not making him ineligible, but what I am going to do is I'm going to financially fine you, and remove your ability to compete in the transfer market, which is exactly what they do in Major League Baseball. If you break the international, I don't know if this is still true because I haven't followed baseball in 4 or 5 years, but when I was following baseball and fantasy baseball leagues and stuff, that's what the rule was. You could only spend a certain amount and do certain things. And then if you went over that, you couldn't do it the next year. But if you got caught tampering in the international market, they would literally remove you for like years from being able to go into the international market. And that's what I think they need to do with transfers. If you get caught tampering in the transfer market, like we all know happened last year with certain players, right? Then that's cool. We're going to fine you $1 million. And you lose access to the transfer portal for 5 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's a nice little tap on the wrist.
Right.
Yeah.
You're at grandma's house and she bends you over the knee and gets out the wooden paddle, and that's what that is. Like, and tans your backside. That's what that is, right? So yeah. That's but that's the only way you're gonna get them to stop breaking these rules. Is to say, we're just going to completely remove this as an option for you to recruit players.
Yeah.
Well, but this kid wants to transfer. Don't care. He can't come play for you. And now when a school is put on that transfer probation, kids aren't going to look at you because they're ineligible.
Yeah.
You can sign 12 transfers next year. That's fine. They can't play.
Right.
So why would a kid do that?
So why would he do that?
Right. So that's you have to create some sort of disincentive. Like, people can say this all they want. Negative incentives to me work in situations like this, right? Like it used to be where all the like for what cheating used to be. It's the players were really the only ones punished. Really,
yeah.
They put like a 3-year show calls on a coach. He goes coaches in the NFL for 3 years and then comes back. He's fine. You know what I mean? They fine the school $10,000. They're fine. That's parking in one lot at a Notre Dame game. You know what I'm saying? It's and then they would, hey, you got to forfeit all the games. That all those rules, they only hurt this player's ineligible. All those things ever did was hurt players.
Yeah.
That's it. Like you need to have these rules hurt the schools where it counts. Not only are we going to not let you hit the transfer portal market, but we're going to fine you enough to where it stings. It's going to sting. So that's what I would do is I would create very harsh penalties. If you're a booster or a collective and you do this, you have to disassociate with that program. You can't support them anymore. You can't attend games. I mean, you just completely disassociate them from the program for 10 years. You know what I mean? Like that's the only ways you're going to make it happen is if you do things like that. That's it. There's no other way, in my opinion, to do it. You have to be very, very strong in your responses to these things. It's the only way to make it work. And so this way, because the problem is if you do it to where the players are punished, you're going to guaranteed you're going to lose in court. The way it is right now, almost guaranteed to lose in court. So you've got to make it to where you're making it so hard on the institutions that, okay, fine, we can't bring the portal. We can't get rid of the portal. We're afraid we're going to lose in court. That's cool. At least protect the integrity of the portal process and create penalties for schools that are very harsh to the degree that they'd be stupid to try to break those rules. Do that and things get clear. Now, teams are always look for ways to cheat, but it's very hard to cheat in that regard in the National Football League and in professional sports. Very hard to cheat. And so, and then when they do, you get hammered. And that's what they're going to have to do if they want to make this work. So somebody said, how about in eligibility of the playoffs? Here's the reason that I would say no to that. Ryan B said that. How about ineligibility of the playoffs? Here's the problem. that hurts the players. So what I would rather say, Ryan, my addition to that would be is anything that where you take their bit away to play in the postseason hurts the players. This team's on a postseason ban. Why? You're just hurting the players that had nothing to do with it. What I say is you can play in the postseason, but you're not making a dime off of it. We will cover your costs like we do for every other bowl team, but you're not getting any revenue beyond covering the cost of playing the bowl game, and you're getting access to zero bowl revenue from your conference. So that's the thing is like, because the question, Sean, was when we're talking about making penalties make them hurt was Brian B said, how about automatic ineligibility to playoffs? And my response went back to, but that's punishing the players again. The guys that had nothing to do with it. So, yeah, you can play in the playoffs, but you're not making any money off of it. Your school is not making any money off of it. We're going to take whatever your cut was, and that's going to get dispersed back to your conference. So if you were going to make $15 million for a bowl game, that money now goes to your competitors. We're not going to punish the conference for you cheating. So you can still play in the bowl game because we're not going to punish the players. But you're not getting any revenue beyond what your cost of travel was. That's it. And now we're going to disperse the money you were going to make. Or if your conference made X amount of dollars, they just now divide it up between 15 schools, not 16. That's a lot of disincentive to cheat, in my opinion. And that's the only way it works. But all the punishments need to not be player related unless the player was the only one doing it. Like if a player's just calling all these schools and all the schools are like, hey, man, we got nothing to do with it. And then somehow the player tries to, he's mad that they don't want him or they won't talk to him. And he tries to get somebody in trouble. Okay, now I'm punishing you because you acted a fool. But if a school cheats and a player or a parent responds to it, the only punishment I would give the players, if he has not enrolled yet, I would say you can't enroll.
Yeah.
If the kid's already enrolled and we find out later that he cheated, I'm not saying you can't play now. Okay, because now you're hurting him and his teammates.
Yeah.
You're hurting his teammates. He cheated, right? But you're now hurting his teammates by taking him away. So that's fine. You can play, but school, you're getting fined 7 figures. You lose access to bowl revenue because I think it also depends on the severity of it, right? Like if it was just like a little minor thing, we're talking like blatant tampering,
right? And
you can't get in the portal for 5 years or 3 years or whatever. And I'm not talking about a year with no portal. I'm talking it's got to sting. It's got to be minimum 3 years. Minimum 3 years is where it's got to be. So that's where I'm at on that, Sean. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I remember before I left for a few minutes, you were talking about the 5 year, and I was like, "Yo, that's a nice little tap on the wrist,"
right?
Sarcastically, but there has to be a deterrent, right? Because you have to know whatever you're doing with the legislation, it has to support the incoming freshmen and the high school players in this endeavor, and then you have to deter coaches from taking their chances to just poach rosters, which top teams are continually doing. So if you're going to get someone, it has to be strategic.
Right.
You're saying, okay, for this year, I really need to go find a veteran because of injuries or whatever. Okay, fine.
Right.
Go ahead. Jump in the portal. But other than that, this should be about recruiting. And it's hard to see the top programs that recruit at the highest level, then get the opportunity to go poach, the best players from rosters.
The last thing on that too, Sean, is I would say you can take walk-ons, but they can't be from the Power 5 level. Right? Like I'm not counting the kid that transferred to Notre Dame, the Krim kid that transferred to Notre Dame. I'm not counting that towards the number. He's a walk-on from the FCS level.
Right, FCS.
That's different. But what you don't want to do is some kids like, well, Alabama only costs $10,000 a year for an in-state kid. If I just walk on there, I can get granting aids and you can do all you can, because you'll finagle the process for a kid that's from your own state or something like that, right? Or hey, this kid will, Kentucky wants to transfer to Bama, but Bama went over, so the kid's a 1-year guy. He's only going to really be there for a semester, and
Right.
so he gets he's going to be a walk-on, so his family gets loans, or they get a Pell Grant, or whatever, give them an academic scholarship or whatever, and that's their way to skirt the system. You can't be a walk-on to another school if you're a Power 5 kid unless you were a walk-on at that other school. So you'd have to really think of all the ways they're going to try to skirt around the process and make sure that you put things in place for that. So anyway, folks, that's going to do it for this show, because right now at 6:00, actually, no, there is no, actually, is there a IB Nation Sports Talk tonight? Let me look at this real quick, Sean. I'm not quite sure about this, because I know Sean is on the road getting ready for the NCAA tournament, or the ACC basketball tournament. Yes, he will. He's going live right now. So Sean Stiers is live right now. So you guys need to leave here, hit over there. But before you do, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast app. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you want our daily written free content, you sign up for the newsletter, which is you can find in the description box below. And of course, sign up for or subscribe to the CFB Nation channel on YouTube and our podcast app, where on the podcast, you can get all the access to all the podcasts that Lucky Lefty, CFB All America does. And then on the YouTube channel, you'll get all the CFB All America and hopefully a couple other things that we're working on right now. So for Sean, I'm Brian. Shockingly, Sean, we went long today. Who knew? Who thought that you and I would go long? I'm just floored by this development. But folks, head on over to IB Nation Sports Talk with Sean Stiers. That is back here right now on the Irish Breakdown channel.